About as ready as I'm ever gonna be. All right. Oh, Lord. It's weird from this side. All right. And instead of looking at my notes, I'm going to do what's called wing it. I don't know if I trust in that. All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails, Famous Fatalities Edition. I am your host, Christy Oxborough, and with me, as always, the light of my life, my better half, co-host and research extraordinaire, Lauren Ash. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for asking. How are you doing?
I am tipsier than I normally am at this point. If anybody has noticed by now, we've done a switch again, and it is a very special episode when we do so. And I know what you're saying. Didn't you just recently, like a month ago, do a switch? And to that, I say, we are givers, constantly giving gifts. That is what we do. We just finished our boozy brunch for March. We had a grand time. We went so long that it cut off and we had to get back in to say goodbye.
Yes, one of the things we offer on Patreon, patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails, is we do a monthly live Q&A with our patrons. And let me tell you a little something. We were live, we were queuing, we were A-ing, and certainly we were into the drink. I've got an empty bottle of Prosecco beside me. A grand time was had.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we all had a great time. Like we suddenly decided we needed bathroom breaks in those because we were all hitting it a little hard. But we had a great time, and I feel that it was just what a beautiful little community that is coming out of this. Bringing in like-minded people. I could not be more jazzed. So with that in mind, I am going to ask you, even though we were drinking various things in that, I'm going to ask you right now, Lauren, what you drinking?
Thank you so much for asking. I did start out on a blood orange mimosa earlier today. Fresh blood oranges. They're in season here in California. Delish. And then I drained this bottle of Prosecco because that's what we do. And now I'm back onto these Cutwater margaritas in a can, because this is what I had on hand. Did I think I was going to drink that many mimosas / glasses of Prosecco on the boozy brunch? I didn't. I think I thought that was what I was going to drink for this, but now we're here and I needed something else and it was on hand. And these things do not disappoint. And I know that some of our listeners have been tweeting about it and tweeting at us saying they were skeptical. And I get it. I was skeptical too of a margarita in a can. It's like, how good could it be? Well, let me tell you, they're delish and you're not going to regret it. And they don't sponsor us. I just love the product. So there you go.
I, for one, can't wait to try one. So that's
well,
on
good
my
news.
bucket list. I've got a half of a Mike's Hard Peach Fuzz. They don't sponsor us, so I can say I don't overly care for it. There are other Mike's Hard products that I do like. This one was one I bought weeks and weeks ago that I was like, yeah, I might like that. Spoiler alert, I don't. And then as a backup to that, when that's done, I've gone with an Arbor Mist Sangria, and I don't know what's gonna happen, but it has also just made me realize my dream for a boozy brunch is to make a sangria. And I like a sangria. I know it takes some time. I can't wait. So I might try it for the next one, maybe. We'll see. We will see what's going to happen with that. But we're just time is weird for us today. We're kind of a little bit manic. We've got a lot of stuff going on. I guess as of now, everyone will know, because we're recording this before anyone knows, but we can fully say it right now. As of right now, the plan is in like 2-3 days, I'm leaving on a jet plane.
She's leaving. Can't afford it.
I know.
It's so exciting.
It's bananas. And I know, dear listeners, you're thinking, it's a pandemic. What are you doing? This is a terrible time of life to go. And I do hear that. And I agree. I don't know if we can mention why specifically I'm going, but things came up that were like, we need to be physically in the same room to be able to do these things. And so the question came up, do I make this journey? We looked into what that would look like, involving like a lot of time in quarantine, getting there, testing before going, then coming back, and then a lot of quarantining while I'm here. So overall, about 4 weeks of quarantine in my life. Yep. So there's just a lot of things. So we weighed it. We went back and forth. And then at first we were like, no, it's just too much. And then other things arose that were like, well, you can actually do this while you're also together. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of hand sanitizer, a lot of wipes, multiple masks, multiple testings. Once I arrive in their country, Lauren has been gracious enough to quarantine with me.
Of course.
So we are going to quarantine for the 10 days that California requires. And then like the day after quarantine, I'm pretty much flying back out. So we are doing a lot of things. It's considered almost more like a business trip. Are we more excited, obviously, to see each other and be together for the first time in a year and a half? Absolutely. But we do also have it's partially a business trip. We are going to be doing nonstop true crime and cocktails related things in person, and things we could not do through Zoom. So it's going to be interesting. So mentally, we are just like
insane
all over the place.
Yep.
And we've also had more to drink at this point in a record than usual, because we thought, what's better than to do a record right after a boozy brunch that we both got quite drunk at. So now we're just gonna pick it up, and I am driving this bus. I should not be driving at all, but
you're doing great. You're drunk driving, by the way. I shouldn't be promoting, but toot toot, you're doing great.
This is what it is, folks. And I think it's going to be a great time, and let us know what you think. And I'm also proud to say, not only is this a special episode in that we have switched places once again, it's also a special episode because of our subject matter.
Heck, yes.
I know, listeners, that right now you're like, wait a minute, hold the phone, pull the reins. How is it you're just like jumping in? We've barely gotten in. You've barely said anything. And you're like, jump in the case. We're going in to the deep end. And dear listeners, I say, she's got a lot of notes.
I do.
We have a lot of places we got to go.
42 pages.
I say this in the most loving way. That is obscene.
I know it is.
And I can't.
I know.
Because I know nothing about this. So I cannot wait. So I feel like I'll just read the synopsis and we're just going to jump in.
Yes.
And get this going, because
get it started. Now, I just want to very quickly give one caveat before we start, which is people might be looking at the name of this episode and going, what do I care? Or I don't know who that is, or whatever. And here's my only plea to you. I am telling you, dear listeners, go on this journey with me, okay? Because this takes twists, it takes turns. There is so much to come in the next couple of hours of your life. I promise you, you will not regret listening to this episode of the show. Because again, I know that people are over this person, or again, are like, I don't even know who that is and why do I care? Please, that's my only request that I make of you is give me a chance. Because I'm telling you, I got the goods. Okay?
As someone who has known Lauren for 3 decades.
Yeah, almost 4.
All I can say, you didn't need to point that out.
But yeah. It's me.
My point is they will never go wrong placing their bet on you.
Bless.
So as far as I'm saying, give her a chance.
Give me a chance. Just give me a chance. I pitched this to Christy before. I feel like she was skeptical. Then I gave her a couple of tidbits and she was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we're good. Also, for those of you watching on Zoom, all of our unedited Zoom episodes are on our website, truecrimeandcocktails.com. My shirt I'm wearing does not match Christy's because it's a shirt Christy gave me years ago that says Dorothy in the streets, Blanche in the sheets.
Come on.
And when I found it, I was like, this needs to make an appearance. So those are the only things I wanted to hit. Christy, you're driving the bus. You are over 50 miles per hour. Wildcat, keep going.
You are making my dreams come true, bringing up speed I would like us to continually find more and more organic ways just to bring up speed.
100%.
I said in the boozy brunch earlier that Paul Rudd is like my ultimate dream crush, but Keanu is right there.
Right? Oh, that's one right we there. Share.
Right there. So, dear listeners, are you ready to buckle up for this special episode about Hollywood actor Armie Hammer? Now, I know what you're thinking. Who the fuck is that? And to which I go, same, because I didn't really know who he was. And then it was pointed out to me that a lot of movies I've watched in the last year, anytime I've gone, oh, who's that creep? The answer is Armie Hammer.
Yeah. So, yep. That is a common occurrence. Yep.
Yep. So buckle up, join us on this journey, and you're going to love it. Just take it as it comes. So in January 2021, a series of screenshots of disturbing DMs allegedly sent by actor Armie Hammer to an anonymous Instagram user at House of Effie went viral. While some questioned the authenticity of the messages, other women began to come forward sharing similar stories about their personal experiences with Armie. The common thread, his apparent fascination with bondage, cannibalism, and dominance. Most recently, House of Effie has accused Armie of rape connected to an incident that occurred in 2017, and the LAPD has announced they are investigating him for the crime. So is Armie Hammer a predator, or does he just have specific sexual proclivities? And what's with the rumor that he's a serial killer who buried a bunch of bodies in the desert? Surely he couldn't have a family history of these sorts of things. Could he? Yes. That's where I'm at.
You're killing the game. I have to watch out because somebody's coming for my job.
Never.
Beautiful. Never. Yes. Now listen. Did I write that summary? Yes, I did. Am I proud of it? Too much so. But I hope, again, if you're skeptical about this topic, that has enticed you to stay, because again, I promise you, you will not regret it. There is so much to come. Things that I'm truly actually nervous to talk about. And that's all jokes aside, because I've discovered some things that I'm like, I shouldn't know this anyway. But yes, well done. By the way, you've slipped into the driver's seat. You put a little lowrider on the radio, and then you just went for a little joyride. It was great.
Look, I am doing my best to just, I feel last time we did the Carol Baskin episode, we did the switcheroo, and I had made notes on everything that was very similar to because we've done so many episodes at this point that I felt that, close my eyes, I could tell your opener and that sort of thing. And I felt afterwards rewatching it, I thought, you know what, my fault there was I tried too hard to be you. And I feel like you have raised the bar so high that I was like, I couldn't reach that. But just go into it as yourself and see how it goes. And you know what? I have made notes just to make sure that I hit certain things, but for the most part, you're just getting it raw.
Which in this episode makes sense.
This is This is going to be an episode where the quotes come out, I feel.
They will. They will.
Without meaning to. So, according to the timeline that my beautiful favorite person over there has filled out for me,
bless,
we're going to talk about Armie Hammer. I want to know, who the fuck is he?
Who the heck are we talking about? Well, thank you, Christy. Thanks for that throw. So, Armie Hammer, I'm going to give you some background. If you're listening, you're like, I don't know who you're talking about. We're going to give you some context. So, he was born August 28th, 1986 in Santa Monica, California. He is an actor. He is 6'5", big guguy.
Wow.
So, yeah, very tall.
That's Jonathan Frakes' height.
It is, which I know. Thank you very much.
Yep.
For bringing Jonathan Frakes back.
That's what I bring into the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So he had a recurring role on Gossip Girl. He worked in a bunch of different things, but his, like, I would say his quote, big break happened playing twins Cameron Winklevoss and Tyler Winklevoss in The Social Network. So if you remember that movie, The Social Network, it was starring, I believe, Jesse Eisenberg, talking about Facebook. That was kind of like his first big thing. Now, granted, he worked in other quote big things before then, but that was his most notable. So then he had a series of unfortunate events. That's how I would describe his movie career. So Lone Ranger, we remember that with Johnny Depp, huge flop, cost Disney about $200,000. Mm-hmm. Then he was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which I think they thought was going to be big. Internationally, it did okay. In America, flop. Then he was in Birth of a Nation, which I don't need to remind you, when that movie first hit, it was massive on the festival circuit until a little story about its writer, director, star, Nate Parker, came out about his rape past. So as a quick reminder, when Nate Parker was attending Penn State in the late 1990s, him and his wrestling teammate, Jean Celestin, I don't know if he's French or not, but that's how I would say it, were accused of raping a female student. Parker was found not guilty, but Jean was found guilty, only later to have the sentence overturned, or the conviction rather overturned. It was public knowledge, but it just kind of fell away. I'm not going to get into the details of this case because, again, we only have so much time, but there's a lot of layers here. And obviously it came back into the forefront of media and spotlight when The Birth of a Nation had such a huge amount of interest at Sundance, I believe, which was where it set a sales record. No film had set this kind of sales record. Automatically, people were like, awards runs. This movie is so good. It's going to be so big. And then this rape charge from the past did come back. Now, it is a little bit creepy to think about because Celestin, Jean, the person he was charged with, does share a story by credit on the film. And there is a large group rape scene in the movie. So it is a little bit creepy that, again, Nate Parker and this guy were accused of essentially group raping a woman, and then they wrote that into this movie. And so it ruined the sale of the movie. That fell apart. The awards run fell apart, all of the above. But I think the other thing that happened was, obviously at the time, because this was all getting a lot of media attention, Nate Parker was very cold in interviews, and he learned that the woman in the trial had tried to commit suicide many times over the years and had actually very unfortunately succeeded in 2012. And he was still very cold about it. And when he would be asked in interviews if he wanted to apologize, he always said no. He talked about how the case had negatively impacted his life, how he was not convicted. And he also said things like, quote, I never thought about the concept of consent, unquote, when he was younger. So the point is that it completely ruined the trajectory of that movie. But it should also be noted as a side note that 5 years later, in 2021, he released a movie called American Skin, which he wrote, directed, and starred in. So he obviously still has interest in production companies, distribution companies, etc. So whether you think he was guilty or not, that's the facts there. Armie Hammer again in that movie that was set to be so huge, and it was yet another one that was not. Again, I encourage you to read more about Nate Parker if you so choose. So back to Armie Hammer. He eventually developed a sense of humor about the fact that as a leading man, he just kept shitting the bed. The movies kept shitting the bed, essentially. At one point, he was asked about low box office return on one film, and he said that might be the Armie Hammer effect. Ha ha ha. And then BuzzFeed actually released an article called 10 Long Years of Trying to Make Armie Hammer Happen. And the subheading was, how many second chances does a handsome white male star get?
I mean, I have to say,
please,
I feel bad almost for saying it, but I don't have a finger on the pulse of Hollywood, but I'd never heard of Birth of a Nation. It does not hurt my feelings to find out that it kind of lost its awards run. Also, Armie Hammer to me is not a leading man. There is something so terrifying about that man that I can't put my finger on, but there's just something about him. He's not the lead guy. So I get that it took so long for him to become something because everybody else is seeing what I'm seeing and just not caring for it. I just can't get past that he was born in 1986.
I know. He's younger than us. It feels very offensive.
Gross and unfair.
It is. It absolutely is. But it's interesting you say that because one of the filmmakers actually that I'm about to talk about, whose name I don't have right in front of my eyes, and because I'm drunk, I can't shuffle these papers. I can't get them out of order, but we'll get to him in a few minutes. He kind of alludes to exactly what you're talking about, which is that it's like on paper in a photograph, Armie Hammer, for lack of whatever, in typical Hollywood standards, it's like he's 6'5". He kind of has these all-American looks. He is who he is, but there is a quality to him. There is something about him that is different. And again, I think part of the reason why I've been so fascinated by him and this story that's kind of been ever kind of changing over the past couple of months, first of all, it's probably because, again, I'm an actor and I'm in this world, et cetera, but also it's because I'm fascinated by the idea of, and I'm already tipping my hand, but the idea of who are the people that have these kind of instincts within them, that have these kind of like darknesses within them. How do they manifest within them? How does it manifest within a very privileged, rich white actor like this guy, as opposed to within someone else? That kind of stuff. Again, if you listen to the show, I am obsessed with the psychology of all of this. And I think that is, you've hit the nail on the head is my point right away, which is I am fascinated by like, what is that quality? What is that thing that we see with this guy that's like, there's just something that's just a little off-putting.
So, he's
right?
off-putting. Yep.
Yeah. Well, again, we'll get to that in a second. But in 2017, Call Me By Your Name was the big hit for Armie, okay? So he was nominated for many, many awards. He was nominated for a Golden Globe, a Critics' Choice Award. Those were probably the two most notable. The movie won at least one Oscar. And then the filmmaker said, it's not just that he's beautiful looking. This is a quote. It's that plus his inner turmoil that is fascinating to me. And that chilled me when I read that because I was like, he's right. That's exactly what's interesting about him. So that performance earned Armie the most acclaim of his entire career. But in an interview he did with Andy Cohen, he did mention that his very religious mother, Drew, refused to see the film because it centers on a same-sex romance. He said, and I quote, "It goes against a lot of her very strong religious beliefs." There's also been some internet rumor that his mother, Drew, is a racist. I have not been able in my research to find anything specific, but one thing I noticed was that going through Armie Hammer's social medias, as I have deeply dived, there we go. He has been very vocal during the whole Black Lives Matter, the protests and everything that were happening last summer, very vocal, which no shade. But what I'll say is, like, when I say vocal, I mean on Twitter, like every tweet, like it is a lot. Now, I don't know whether he has been tweeting other things and he's gone through and deleted, and that's why it seems like it's very specific, but it just was very interesting to me when I read that there was rumor that his mother was kind of like a devout racist. It made me wonder, is the reason he's being so vocal during Black Lives Matter because maybe he's kind of fighting against his upbringing, kind of uncomfortable with what he grew up with, at least with his mother. Again, I can't offer a definitive answer to that. I offer it just again as some interesting backstory. So now we have to get into the Hammer family history, because this is crazy. Okay. This is wild. The details, and I will try and get through it as fast as I can, but I'll give you this first chunk and you'll know why I'm like fascinated and so into this as a case. Mm-hmm. So the family's first brush with scandal happened in 1919 with Armie's great-great-grandfather, Dr. Julius Hammer. Julius was a Russian immigrant. He was living in the Bronx, and he was a central member of the Communist Party of the United States. The scandal came when he gave the wife of a Russian diplomat an abortion. The woman, Marie Oganisov, I think, ended up dying a few days later from this abortion done by Armie's great-great-grandfather. In 1921, 2 years later, Julius was arrested, tried, and convicted of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 3 years in Sing Sing prison, and his son, Armand Hammer, who of course is Armie's namesake and great-grandfather, always believed that his father Julius was railroaded on trumped-up charges because of his political activities, those being a member of the Communist Party. Now, I am going to try for social media to make a family tree because it is so confusing and the names are all so similar, but please just try to go with me. As I've written this, I've written in like, again, I'm going to try and like reaffirm who everybody is to everybody as I go, because it gets convoluted fast. So with Julius, again, this is Armie's great-great-grandfather in prison, 22-year-old Armand abandoned his medical career to take over his father's other business, which was called Allied Drug. Although he apparently for his entire life always preferred to be called Dr. Hammer, which was a reference to his medical degree that he had that he literally never used. Again, all makes sense.
Did he actually finish the degree and get the degree?
Apparently he did have the degree, but he literally never practiced.
Huh.
So that's Armand, again, being Armie's great-grandfather and namesake. So Vladimir Lenin, who was premier of the Soviet Union, sent a message to, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, a Joseph Stalin, and said, hey, you should really support this Armand Hammer because it's a small path to the American business world, which should be made use of in every possible way. So Lenin was literally like, hey, Joseph Stalin, you should really connect with this dude.
I mean, because I know if anything, I like to let Stalin know things. Again, and I want him connected to everything.
Again, like when I started to go into this is why I was like, there's so many layers to like why this person is fascinating. And this is one of them. Like, so his great-great-grandfather, again, is in prison for doing this essential illegal abortion, which killed a woman. And then his great-grandfather is basically having meetings with Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin. Now, Lenin sent that message, and then the day after he sent it, was paralyzed by a nearly fatal stroke and never kind of clarified what he meant. But Armand moved to the Soviet Union in 1921 to try and fortify family connections, which is how they described it. While he was there, he married a Russian singer named Olga Vadina. Together, they had a son in 1929 named Julian. Again, these names are so similar, but Julian is Armie's grandfather. So Armand, Armie's great-grandfather, was always suspect about whether Julian was actually his biological son until a DNA test in 1988 confirmed it, which was only 2 years before Armand died. So he literally spent his whole life being like, I don't even know if he is my son. And then 2 years before he died, it was like, oh, yep, he is. This poor person, like this poor man.
That makes the father-son picnics a little awkward, doesn't it? Do father sons have picnics? I don't know what's happening to me. Julian, the great grandfather.
Thank you very
Or
much.
no, Julian is the grandfather. Julius is the great great grandfather. I've been taking notes.
You're doing great. Exactly. So Armand, great grandfather, he actually acted as an agent for trade with the Soviet Union from the United States. So he started trading and basically encouraging companies in the United States to trade with the Soviet Union. Once his dad got out of prison, when he was paroled from Sing Sing in 1923, he joined in, and also his brother, Harry Hammer, joined in this whole kind of like family business. And by 1925, Armand succeeded in recruiting no fewer than 38 American corporations to supply Russia with everything from machinery to agricultural equipment. He also made a connection between the Ford Motor Company and the Soviet Union. There was just like these very, very deep ties, which is interesting to me. Armand had a company called the Allied American Corporation in Moscow, and he insisted that he was the sole owner. But according to documents, he was not the sole owner. The Soviet government was also an owner of this company, and they arguably had just as much, if not more, power in that company. And that's something that Armand either didn't remember or didn't want to admit publicly. So he comes back to the United States in 1932, and the Soviet government gave him millions of dollars of art. And most of the art came out of Soviet museums and warehouses. He then went on to sell that art in the United States through department stores, and he had a Hammer galleries in his own name. For more than a decade, he continued to import art from the Soviet Union. It's estimated that his art brought him a profit of over $11 million during the Great Depression. So think again, during that time, so already there's like a money disparity to what it would be now. And during the Great Depression, when everybody was at their lowest, that's how much money he was bringing in, which is nuts. So he comes back to New York from Moscow, separates from his wife, Olga, who decides to go out to Hollywood to try and pursue her singing career with their son, Julian. Fine. Armand goes on to marry a woman named Angela Zevely, who is a socially prominent woman from Red Bank, New Jersey, but the relationship kind of fizzles. And in 1953, he files for divorce. He says that she's mentally cruel, quote unquote, but she offered some comments also, including, and these are her quotes, that he had a cold and calculating brain and that it causes him no pain to see the suffering of others.
Mm-hmm.
In 1955, he sold off a herd of Black Angus cattle that he owned. He also sold a whiskey business, and he himself moved out to Los Angeles, where he married for a third time to Frances Tolman. The next year, he bought a defunct oil company called Occidental Petroleum. But sources say that at that point, he was actually broke and needed his new wife, Frances's money to buy that company. It should also be noted again that he would have brought in $11 million during the Great Depression. So how is it that he went through that money by 1955? We don't have answers to that question. But again, this all paints a picture of what this family was, of who these people are, of what this gene pool is. And I'm not saying that you can judge any one person by their gene pool, but the information about Armand Hammer, again, specifically, is fascinating. So in 1961, Armand goes back to Russia and he meets with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. I don't know. Anyway, Khrushchev had specifically requested the meeting in the Kremlin. They spoke in Russian. They wouldn't let any other people be in the room. And he told Armand that he needed, quote, billions of dollars of phosphorus-based fertilizer, which is so specific. He said that it was so they could promote agriculture in Russia. I don't know. Anyway, Armand saw this as a possibility, and he basically turned Occidental Petroleum into a fertilizer company, even though it was named Occidental Petroleum. And eventually, petroleum and oil only made up for 10% of their money. It turned into a fertilizer company predominantly. But after the Cuban Missile Crisis, everything kind of fell apart. So after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he found another opportunity in Libya in the early 1970s, where Armand Hammer specifically changed the way that oil is traded, which continues to this day. So again, I can't get into the like exact details because it would take us a full podcast to talk about, but basically it was like he changed the rules of the game. So then after his kind of like grandstanding and deal making, oil companies after that fact could be played off of one another. So the deal not only made him multi-billion dollars, but it also literally changed the way that oil is bought and sold and traded to now. So again, this is like a very powerful person. There is speculation. Did the Soviet government have some influence on that? They claim no. There was a CIA counterintelligence probe that was actually involved in that, but they couldn't come up with anything substantial. Neither here nor there, but also, again, paints the picture. So there was an enormous cash flow coming in from these oil deals in Libya. He took that money and bought other properties around the world, oil properties, Venezuela, all kinds of different places. Again, I could get into all of it, but basically more money spent, more drama ensuing. This person is insanely powerful, is the point. He also wanted to try eventually to distance himself from his Soviet connections, trying to make himself look like this self-made industrialist in America. He hired a journalist to ghostwrite a memoir for him called The Remarkable Life of Dr. Armand Hammer. He had a private Boeing 727. He was friends with Prince Charles and other high-powered politicians. He was a close friend of Senator Al Gore Sr. and attended the inaugurations of FDR, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, as well as other presidents. He collected a lot of artwork, convinced Chinese leaders to lend 2 pandas to Los Angeles for the city's 1984 Olympics.
Oh.
Yeah. So again, just painting the picture again that like, it's just interesting. And we'll get into Armie Hammer specifically and what he's done, but it's just interesting that this is his bloodline and his lineage. It's just interesting to me. And I think, important to note just because it's titillating and interesting. So now we're getting into the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Armand also had multiple mistresses.
Of course he did.
One of them was named Martha Kaufman. She was a mother of 2 who divorced her husband after meeting Armand and whom he put on the Occidental Petroleum payroll as a, quote, art consultant. When Armand's wife, who I will remind you is Armie's grandmother, Frances, grew suspicious, or great, whatever, Armand had Martha legally change her name to Hillary Gibson and insisted that she wear wigs, glasses, and makeup to change her appearance. The affair lasted over a decade with Armand. Yep. With Armand promising to take care of her and her children after he died, according to his demands. This is where this is the stuff you want to pay attention to. He insisted that she drive a car with a homing device, that she only use a tapped phone that he had access to the recordings of, and that she must submit to any and all of his sexual demands, even when they were extremely humiliating. After all of that, wait for it. After all of that, when Armand died in 1990, she learned he left her out of the will.
Nothing.
He left her absolutely nothing. He apparently also had a daughter out of wedlock with a different one of his acknowledged mistresses. Some people have said that he supported that daughter. Others have not. I couldn't get a firm line on who that was or whether he did or didn't support her. But the big story here is Hillary Gibson. I want to remind you, this is a woman who he demanded change her name, change her appearance, promised when I die, I will support you and your children. And that if you do all these things for me, she followed suit and he left her $0.
That is the epitome of garbage.
It's bad.
I am going to choose not to even think about what those things he could have asked her to do. And now I'm ready to start a hashtag justice for Hillary. And this is from like, I'm not even sure she's still alive. Probably not based on the time frame we're at.
Yeah.
The point is, good God. Okay.
I know. So again, Armand, Armie's great grandfather. I love that. I even fucked up, I think, once there, but anyway, great grandfather. So it's said that he was the kind of guy who required his son Julian, his daughter-in-law Sue, and his 3 grandchildren to make appointments if they wanted to see him. He didn't care much for his son Julian, and he passed his entire estate, everything. He passed it over Julian to Julian's son, Michael, who is Armie Hammer's father. His entire business empire. Now there's a Casey Hammer. That is Michael's sister or Armie's aunt. I know this is confusing again. We will try and put together a very involved family tree. But Casey Hammer, Armie's aunt, believes her father Julian caused too much trouble and offended Armand's obsession with appearances. She said Julian could never get his father's attention unless he resorted to really, really bad behavior. Well, I'll tell you about a story that definitely got his father's attention. Would you like to hear it? I know you would.
100%.
In 1955, Julian turned 26. In the morning hours after his 26th birthday, he had a man in his house who he apparently got into an argument with. And there was apparently maybe a gambling debt. And this man was advancing on Julian's wife, who was named Glenna Sue. And so Julian just killed this guy in his own Los Angeles home in cold blood, shot him, got out a gun, shot this guy. The front page headlines in the newspapers read, quote, "Millionaire's son kills GI." I believe he was a soldier, this guy. And Armand had a friend deliver $50,000 in cash to a lawyer in Los Angeles. Julian claimed self-defense and all the charges were dismissed. I tried to look into this crime. I dug and dug and dug, and there is nothing else that you can find. They literally buried it. But it should also be noted that the $50,000, the only thing I could find was that was not Armand's money. It was once again Frances Tolman, Armand's third wife's money. It was not his own money. I also just think it's good to note that Armie's grandfather committed a murder and his great-grandfather had a mistress that he controlled by incessant monitoring, extreme humiliating sexual demands, etc. I think that this is all important, just kind of like building context for what we're going to talk about, specifically about Armie.
And not just also, according to the notes I've been taking, his great-great-grandfather was charged with first-degree manslaughter.
Thank you very much for reminding me of that, for doing an illegal abortion. Yes. Yeah. In 2015, Casey Hammer, Armie's aunt, who I have mentioned, released a self-published book called Surviving My Birthright. In it, she alleges that her father, Julian, sexually abused her when she was a child, and that he was also abusive to other members in the family. In an email, Jan Ward, who was Casey and Michael being Armie's father, this was their half-sister. Jan declined to comment on the allegations. She did kind of give this fluffy statement, but she wouldn't really say anything specific. Casey, the aunt, is now estranged from most of her family. She works at a San Diego Home Depot, which feels a little ironic because the last name is Hammer. She also says that the show Succession is unbearable for her to watch because it is an exact portrayal of their family, which I thought was interesting. So, Armand, we're back to Armand. If he wanted to keep the empire he built in his family, he did not have a lot of options. He had one son, Julian. He felt that this guy was unreliable. His grandson, Michael, Armie's dad, by multiple accounts, was not as bright as Julian and was much more interested in a playboy lifestyle than world domination. Michael, it is said, struggled with excess. But in 1985, Michael, then working at Occidental Petroleum, met a woman named Drew Mobley on a plane. Armie Hammer has said, "My dad was supposed to be on a flight, went to the airport, got hammered and passed out. He missed his flight, woke up and was like, oh God, I have a meeting." He rebooked, switched seats due to claustrophobia, and wound up next to Drew. They married that year and had Armie the next. Drew is a devout Christian who seemed to have a tempering effect on Michael's own struggles, which included drinking and drugs. Michael has said, "When I accepted Christ, the bad experiences didn't just stop, but they started dwindling. Always risky when you just put that in someone else's hands, like,
I can't imagine getting so loaded at an airport that I pass out and miss my flight.
Never say never, but yeah.
we'll see what the next few weeks brings in my life. But yeah, I guess we'll retouch on that later on after I've been to a flight. But yeah, that just feels like,
again, it's just painting a picture of kind of this lineage. And I will say one more time, because I don't want people to come for me, I am not saying that someone should be judged by their family members, their predecessors, anything like that. But I think in this case, you will see as we continue, much like when Christy was like, I'm giving you all this backstory. There's a reason I'm giving you all this backstory that will pay off later. So when Armie was 4 in 1990, his great-grandfather Armand, who we have been talking about, who was estimated by Forbes to be worth around $180 million at the time, did die from bone cancer. The battle for his estate began almost immediately. Within hours of his death, police officers were summoned to the house, observing Michael, Armie's dad, trying to remove belongings and load them into 5 waiting cars. Okay. The house was owned by Frances, Armand's wife, who kept fronting him money. She owned the house. She had already passed, and it was supposed to go to Frances's niece when Armand finally died. It's unclear who it ended up going to, but everybody was basically just like vultures, right? Mm. Casey, Armie's aunt, and Hillary, the mistress, claimed that Armand had made promises that his estate would take care of them. But at the will reading in a Los Angeles law office, it was determined he wasn't worth $180 million. He only had $40 million. And he owed a lot of money. There were charities that were coming forward saying he had promised to give them money that he had never made good on. So they were trying to cash in. At the end of the day, Casey and her father, Julian being Armand's only son, they each got only $250,000 of the $40 million estate. Armand also specifically mentioned Jan, who was Sue's daughter from another relationship, Sue being married to Julian. So therefore, this is Armand's step-granddaughter. He specifically named her in the will as saying she has no claim to a penny. Yeah, because she was step. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. His company, it should be noted, also wrote off more than $2 billion in extravagances and money-losing business deals. Casey, our Armie's aunt, says, all of a sudden, I'm in a bad Stephen King novel. My father is worried about why Michael got the Rolls Royce. And I'm like, Dad, you don't understand. You're going to be out on the street. No one is paying for your house. No one is paying for everything. The next day, Casey said she sat with her father, Julian, so that he didn't blow his brains out, because now he's threatening to kill me. He's threatening to kill Michael. He's threatening to kill everybody. Julian, her father, of course, being Armand's only son. Mm-hmm. In total, 100 claims and lawsuits were filed against Armand's estate by Casey, by the former mistresses, by charities, et cetera, et cetera. It's said that Casey settled for around $1.4 million, and Hillary Gibson, that mistress, apparently settled for $4.2 million. And I say, good for you. Good for you.
Justice for Hillary.
Well, she got her payday. Thank God. Good on her.
Good. Yes. That's all I needed to hear. I could not be more happy.
100%. So there was also a bunch of scandal, Michael, again, Armie's father, his mother, Sue, kept saying, oh, he's forgotten about his family. He only cares about his wife, Drew's family. There was some speculation that Armand had left money in lock boxes and in overseas bank accounts. And one of Michael's college friends named Scott Dietrich did get caught coming back on a flight from London with $60,000 in undeclared cash jammed in his cowboy boots. So there is some speculation. He had also apparently taken 12 trips to England lasting less than 36 hours. So people do think that maybe they were trying to move money around through this guy's cowboy boots, which is amazing. Armand had decided to reaffirm himself into the Jewish faith in his later years. And he wanted a belated bar mitzvah in his 92nd year, but he actually died the day before it was scheduled. So the day before his bar mitzvah, he died. But there was a shock at the funeral 2 days later because a born-again pastor stood up and announced that on his deathbed, Armand renounced this Jewish heritage and said he accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. Hillary Gibson said, and I quote, Armand never believed in anything but himself. Love that. The man who announced his deathbed conversion was a man named Douglas L. Mobley. That's right. The father of Michael's wife, Drew Ann Mobley, Drew Ann and Michael being Armie Hammer's parents. So, sole executor Michael became the pivotal figure in Armand's legacy. Drew, of course, was devoutly religious. This bled into the family. In 1996, there was a biography written by Edward J. Epstein, which exposed Armand for grifts, including laundering money, using artwork to fund Soviet espionage, bribing his way into the oil business, knocking off Fabergé eggs. Armand apparently bugged his office and home, and cufflinks all had recording devices to record decades worth of conversations. He had a fixer. He was known to do business with a briefcase full of cash. He made an illegal contribution to the Nixon re-election campaign, which, quote, in all likelihood, according to the New York Times, went to help pay for the Watergate cover-up. He faced a felony charge for obstructing justice, but a Washington lawyer helped him plead guilty to a misdemeanor instead, and George H.W. Bush pardoned him. And Armand was apparently a Democrat. So what the fuck? Why is he doing all this shit for the Republicans? I don't know.
So was it Armand or was it Julian that you said was at the presidential thing of all these presidents, including one of the Bushes?
Armand.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just...
Oh, the layers of like, who is this person? How deep is he in? What is he doing with the Soviet Union, etc.? It's wild. So Julian, Armand's only son, died April 3rd, 1996 of heart failure. Some say that Armand tortured Julian for his entire life over that $50,000 payoff over that killing. Some say he personally had to, quote, work off the money by physically constructing the listening devices that Armand used. Somehow Armand would trust him with putting the bugs in the rooms and the cufflinks, etc., but he would not trust him with what the information that they were talking of was about. The last piece of information I need to give on this is there is a popular misconception that the Hammers created the Arm and Hammer baking soda brand, Arm and Hammer, Arm and Hammer. That is not true. They did not create it, but Armand, because of the name play, because of the wordplay, tried to buy the company because he thought it would be cool to, if his name was Armand Hammer, to own a company named Arm and Hammer. He was rejected, but he did invest in it. So that is a misconception that we can debunk right now.
Look, I have never been so happy to hear that a specific person or specific man in this case was denied something.
Yeah.
Because this, I mean, I am still hashtag Hillary, justice for Hillary, but also money in cowboy boots is
amazing, right?
Just making me laugh so hard. Can you imagine? I'm visually seeing it as a cartoon with like the money flowing out of his pants, and every time he walks, like coins are falling behind him.
Well, and also this was at a time where you didn't have to take your shoes off when you were going through security, right? So you could fill your boots full of money potentially.
That's amazing. And to me, I know that it wouldn't have been coins, but to me, it's funnier when it's coins because every time he'd walk, it would have that like sound like he was wearing spurs, that like change sound every time he moved. That's very, yes.
Oh,
that is
100%.
So funny to me. And for my own sake, just to make it even funnier, in my head, he looks like Yosemite Sam.
I cannot confirm or deny, but I can.
Yeah,
I want to.
I think we go with it.
My heart can. All right. So Armie's dad, Michael, let's talk about him. When Armie was 7 in 1993, Michael moved the whole family, which is Drew, Armie, and a younger brother, Victor, to a seaside condo on Grand Cayman in the Cayman Islands. So this meant that Michael briefly relinquished his U.S. citizenship. This move, according to Armie, was predicated on Michael's having been a big fan of the movie The Firm, starring Tom Cruise, in which he travels to the Caribbean tax haven. Okay. 5 years later, the family returned to California, but the transition away from the Caribbean was difficult. In 2005, the 21-room manor in Pasadena that the family was renovating burnt down, which is, tragic. In 2011, Michael, again, this is Armie's dad, spent the night in a Santa Barbara jail for a DUI charge that was subsequently dropped. But later that year, bigger trouble blew his way when the Knoedler Gallery, which was part of Michael's inheritance from Armand, and one of the oldest New York galleries, suddenly shuttered because the gallery and its former director, Anne Friedman, were sued by hedge fund executive Pierre Lagrange for selling him a forged Pollock painting for $17 million. It turns out Knoedler was accused of selling $70 million of fake paintings. They were all done by an artist in Queens in a con that allegedly stretched back to 1994. In total, it was 63 forged pieces. All of the 10 lawsuits that were filed were settled, one midway through a high-profile trial in 2016 involving Tom Ford International and Sotheby's, which is a very famous company, which was looking for $25 million in damage. So wild. During that trial, an accountant testified that Michael had essentially used the holdings group, which owned the gallery, as his personal piggy bank, using a company credit card to buy, among other things, 2 luxury cars and a trip to Paris for a little over $1 million. When Michael sold one of the cars, which was a Rolls Royce in 2008, he kept $452,000, listing it as a salary on his W-2 that year. Crazy. About an hour before Michael was scheduled to testify in this case, both parties reached a settlement. Again, it's crazy because people, of course, thought that this was going to tarnish Michael's name and then look bad on Armie Hammer. Nothing ever came of it, ultimately. In 2012, Michael and his wife Drew divorced after 27 years of marriage. And this is where things start to turn. For years, people have claimed that Michael has bragged about having what he calls a sex throne, or naughty chair is another way he's called it. It's apparently kept in the Armand Hammer Foundation headquarters in Carpinteria, a warehouse where 2 people claim Michael lived for several years after his divorce. The structure, the throne, is 7 feet high, featuring a chair with a hole in the seat, a cage underneath, and a hook. The Hammer coat of arms, the same one that for years adorned the exterior of the headquarters, is painted on the seat. In a photograph, Michael sits on the throne, grinning while holding the head of a blonde woman sitting in the cage and also smiling. In response to questions about the sex throne, Michael's drug and alcohol use, finances, and history with women, a lawyer for him and the Armand Hammer Foundation said, "These questions, which ask about unsolicited gag gifts sent by friends, conduct that sounds pretty typical of recently divorced people, and entirely legal financial transactions that were properly accounted for, are absurd." That's what the lawyers are saying. In 2017, 5 years after he and Drew divorced, he proposed to Misty Millward, a spa healer who Michael says helped him recover from back surgery. He proposed with a 7.5 carat diamond on the 4th of July. Michael says the proposal had a patriotic theme: a red alligator skin Birkin bag, Armand's white Rolls Royce, in which he popped the question, and the blue of Michael's very own eyes. Spoken like a true narcissist.
I don't know how I come back from sex throne.
Sex throne. Yeah. I've been trying to find pictures of it too, and I can't. And I'm going to keep looking before we release this episode.
I am very worried about your search history.
Me as well. If the FBI is listening, please believe us. I am a good person.
I'm trying to envision this. And when you say, like, there's a seat, there's a hole in the seat, there's a cage, and then there's a hook. Where is the hook?
No one got into what the hook did. And also, how is the cage big enough for I can't. We need a photo. I need to legitimately
Yes.
know what this is.
The fact that it also has their family like coat of arms, you can't even be like, oh, it was a gag gift from friends. Like, no one goes that far. But also, like, I'm getting very strong George Clooney in Burn After Reading when he like makes that weird pipe with the dildo.
Yes, 100%.
And also just because I know the people enjoy it when I've had a little too much, and Blanche comes out, hey yo, to George Clooney. Because,
Yeah,
I could not be happier that he married, which sounds crazy, but
it's nice.
she is so lovely. And it seems like she brought out the best in him. I don't know them personally. It doesn't matter. He's gotten more attractive as he's aged. Doesn't matter.
Yes. Yeah. I have to pee.
Okay.
Yes, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that Blanche is interested in George Clooney. I think he's classic, like a fine wine, and I'm here for it.
He has only gotten better with age. I had a crush starting back on ER.
Huh.
That's where it started for me. Dr. Doug Ross.
Mm.
Heyo. And back then he was brunette as opposed to the silver fox he's quickly becoming. I probably have a lot of things I should discuss with a professional, but that's neither here nor there.
I think you're doing great.
Yeah.
I think you're doing great.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to move on to Armie specifically. His
Okay.
upbringing through his own eyes was, quote, picturesque. As a child in the Cayman Islands, he says he was a machete wielding, tree climbing Tom Sawyer. He called the Cayman Islands, quote, fucking paradise. He also said he used to have a painting of Gorbachev that was given to his family by Gorbachev. So interesting. He says he was raised with good values thanks to his mom, Drew. He said that her parents grew up in the Depression in Oklahoma, so she didn't allow them to be raised like they were wealthy. After 5 years in the Cayman Islands, they moved back to LA. He dropped out of school in the 11th grade. His image conscious and outwardly religious parents disapproved of his decision to become an actor. He says, my entire life has been this long, pressured conversation about the family I represented. Interesting. He did find some success, and when he booked a starring role as a young Billy Graham in the 2008 biopic Billy, the early years, his mother Drew did host a screening for about 300 friends. So, I mean, ultimately supportive. Although,
He
again,
also is very religious, right?
I believe so.
So
yeah, great point. Good point.
Billy Graham, come on.
Great point.
That makes sense.
So Armie has claimed financial independence from his family throughout his career. He says that he's very proud of that. So much so that in 2017, he confessed that he couldn't pay a bet he had made to the Call Me By Your Name filmmaker, Luca Guadagnino. I'm so sorry. Armie said at the time, it would literally bankrupt me and I need to buy diapers tomorrow. That's the level of lack of money he had at that time. In 2018, Armie told Conan O'Brien about his own arrest in 2011, which I will add is the same year that his father, Michael, was pulled over for that DUI in Santa Barbara. Armie and a friend had been transporting supplies for Armie's wife, Elizabeth's bakery called Bird through Texas when their truck was stopped at a checkpoint. A dog sniffed marijuana. Armie spent the night in jail. He said the inmates were great, but that the guards were assholes. He married his wife, I should say, Elizabeth Chambers, in 2010 after 3 years of dating. Friend of the family, Kathy Lee Gifford, said, I mean, they're the Ken and the Barbie of the world. They are the Ken and the Barbie of the world. I don't know if that was a direct quote or not. If it was she drunk? Who knows? Anyway, Armie said that when they met, that Elizabeth had a boyfriend, so they were just friends until he finally told her to break up with him so they could date, and she did. Armie and Elizabeth had 2 children, a daughter, Harper, in 2014, and then a son, Ford, in 2017. It's weird to me they named his son Ford when they have this family history of working for the Ford Motor Company. But then I was like, maybe I'm reading into it too much. However, Ford's middle name is Armand, So it's also like, it wouldn't surprise me if it was a deliberate choice. Some people have described Armie as a sweet, goofy, unfiltered guy who loves his children, a what you see is what you get kind of person. Timothy Chalamet, who of course was his co-star in Call Me by Your Name, once described Armie as an example of when people present themselves as they truly are. So, okay, if that's how people see him, then let's just read a few quotes that Armie himself has said in magazines. Here's one he said to Elle. One chick tried to stab me when we were having sex. She was like, true love leaves scars. You don't have any. Then she tried to stab me with a butcher knife. He apparently continued to date her for 7 months. Also to Elle, he said, my wife says I have a frontal lobe issue. Your frontal lobe controls your danger response. Like, whoa, I shouldn't be doing this. That was in reference to a violent altercation he had with a homeless man. Yeah. To details, he said, he recounted a story of a multi-day beer-soaked bachelorette party that concluded with an epic bonfire and a giant tequila bottle full of gasoline and a machine gun. To Playboy, he discussed the effect his wife Elizabeth had on his bedroom habits. He said, and I quote, I used to like to be a dominant lover. I like grabbing the neck and hair and all of that. Then you get married and your sexual appetites change. You can't really pull your wife's hair. It gets to a point where you say, I respect you too much to do these things that I want to do. After that Playboy interview, he expressed regret, explaining he had learned the hard way not to drink during interviews. But at a later British GQ interview, he apparently drank so many martinis with the writer that writer blacked out. So apparently he kept drinking during interviews is my point. Now, apparently he and Elizabeth went to a porn shop on their first date. So I don't know how into this or not into this she was or is or what have you. Not I don't know if she was upset by his oversharing or not. There's no information I could find about that. Just to be clear.
I mean, as long as both people, or if I may be so bold for listeners, I don't know, everyone involved, however many people may be involved, as long as everyone is as long as everyone consents to it,
100%.
If no one is being harmed in a way anyway, and everyone's into it, go for it.
100%. Oh, absolutely. And I want to just make a very clear statement right now before I start to get into the next bit. We're not suggesting that people who are indulging in the kind of sexual interests that he had are bad. It's that it's, and you can listen and read for yourself about where this goes and the issue of consent and the issue of was he getting consent? Was he manipulating these people? And where exactly did it go? Yes, if people are all consenting and on the same page, that's everybody else's business. But I think that the real issue in with this person is that is very debatable. So this is where it starts to turn. So Armie didn't realize that on Twitter, you can see all of the tweets that someone has liked. There's a little column and you just click a button and it shows you what the person has liked. So on March 12th, 2017, a random user posted a screen grab of some of the tweets that Armie had been liking, stuff including a woman tied to a chair, a woman's butt with a rope in the butt crack, a rope bondage post entitled, and I quote, super nipple technique. So it seemed pretty clear at that point that Armie was into bondage. He has also spoken profusely about his love of tying knots to Playboy. On the Stephen Colbert show, on the Late Show, he challenged Stephen Colbert to a knot tying contest. And in InStyle magazine, he stated, I've never admitted this before, but sometimes I carry a rope to practice tying knots. A source close to his wife, Elizabeth, said that while he was not working, Armie would throw himself into hobbies with great intensity. Several years back, he introduced Elizabeth to shibari, which is a Japanese bondage art form in which people are tied up in intricate patterns. Elizabeth apparently tried to be supportive of the interest, which Armie allegedly indulged in by buying mannequins and inventing his own elaborate knots. Elizabeth apparently even tried to find a spin on the obsession, suggesting he write a book about the hobby called Why Not? Wordplay. It's unclear about whether they ever engaged in the practice together or not. That is unclear.
I'm sorry, but why not is Clever.
Clever. Absolutely.
I'm responding to the cleverness of the title. And that's it.
100%.
Yeah.
So according to a friend close to Elizabeth, Armie confessed to being unfaithful shortly after his son's birth in 2017, but claimed it was a one-time thing. This was around the same time the bondage tweets were discovered. It's unclear who the affair is with, but in 2019, Elizabeth apparently found evidence of an affair Armie was having with a co-star. There are rumors it could have been his Rebecca, that's the movie, co-star Lily James. One source says that Elizabeth found steamy messages signed from someone named Adeline, which was the name Lily used on set for Rebecca. That was what her trailer said, Adeline, all those kinds of things. Sure. In October 2020, the 31-year-old actress Lily James caused a media storm when she was photographed in a steamy embrace with married actor Dominic West on a getaway in Rome. This led Dominic West to scurry back to his wife and pose for photos, saying that their marriage was intact and as strong as ever. But in a video interview for Harper's Bazaar in September 2020, Lily did promote the movie Rebecca, in which she spoke of affairs, her own rebellious streak, and how she, quote, makes mistakes all the time. There's speculation about this. It's just food for thought about whether or not it could be her. Ultimately, does it matter? No. But again, it does feel like it may not be impossible that it was this woman. Elizabeth and Armie had been in expensive family therapy, but Elizabeth felt that Armie's indiscretions, and more notably, his decision to leave the Cayman Islands to return to the U.S. during the pandemic, was the final straw for her. But here's the deal. Armie flies back to the U.S., okay? And as soon as he touched down, he sent mistakenly a very raunchy text message that was apparently meant for someone else accidentally to his wife, Elizabeth. And then apparently that was the last straw, and Elizabeth filed for divorce. That is what I've been reading. By his own admissions over the years, Armie has enjoyed partying, finally free from restrictions of his decade-long marriage / 13-year relationship. He has been indulging. Friends close to the family remarked that his separation behavior recalled his father, Michael's. Michael's post-split behavior is said to have involved a string of women, illicit substances, and tattoos. Michael got a tattoo of the popular Armie Hammer logo on his arm. And then it's also said that Armie suddenly got 5 tattoos in a matter of months after his split. Armie has also depicted a new dark side on a secret Instagram feed. The account is at L_Destructo_86. I don't think he's active on there anymore, obviously, but at the time, there was a photo of him taking a drug test, which was captioned, "All negative, bitches. My body is a finely tuned toxicant processing unit. To be fair, I had THC and benzos in my piss, but who doesn't?" Another photo showed a mannequin tied up with the caption, "If quarantine doesn't start moving more quickly, I'm going to fuck this thing."
There is something so crass about the usage of the word piss. You know, like that's just,
especially when it's a drug test that he's taking in order to see his children. Think about that.
Yeah. And they already had people had commented that he was this super devoted dad. And again, we're not saying he's not, but there was also a scandal, and I haven't talked about this in any of my notes, but there was a scandal a few years ago because there was a video of his son sucking on Armie's toes. And it became this huge news story, and whether you agree with it or disagree with it or whatever. And I know that Elizabeth Chambers at the time came to his defense. I only bring it up now because, not that I think that means he's a bad dad, but it's just interesting again in the narrative of everything that we're talking about. It's like he took the how he was raised, of like practically like a lost boy from Neverland, where he said he was like Tom Sawyer running around this like island with a machete, which is intense. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like, well, that's how I was raised. So lawless land for my own son.
Yeah. Great point.
That's weird. It's weird.
It's weird.
It's weird. It's weirder than money in your cowboy boots.
And so few things are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, listen, I feel like before I get into the sex scandal, because I feel like, we're seamlessly just transitioning into there, I feel like we should take a quick break.
Well, I mean, you heard the lady. Grab a drink, grab a snack, because I am starving. So get yourself a snack, get yourself ready to go, refresh, and we will be right back on this Armie Hammer special episode of True Crime and Cocktails, Famous Fatalities Edition. All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right, welcome back to nope, I have to take that again. I've never done that before. I've fucked up before, but I've never had to outright. Nope. I have to make a note that we're okay. Okay. And welcome back to this very special Armie Hammer episode of True Crime and Cocktails, Famous Fatalities Edition. We've been talking family scandals. We've been talking sex thrones. We've been talking the delightfully gorgeous George Clooney.
Thank you.
What else you got for me?
Well, now we're getting into the goods. Now we're getting into the Armie Hammer sex scandal, as it were. So this all started January 10th, 2021. An anonymous Instagram account at House of Effie posted messages claiming to be from Armie Hammer, detailing extreme BDSM scenarios. The date stamps ranged from 2016 to 2020. Now, I'm about to read you some of these quotes. Trigger warning, first of all. Second of all, these are not words or sentences that I would probably normally say. So again, just giving that as a heads up. I also am not reading everything that he wrote. There is lots more that he wrote. This is just a sampling. You just live to obey and be my slave. I will own you. Would you come and be my property until you die? If I wanted to cut off one of your toes and keep it with me in my pocket so I always had a piece of you in my possession? I am 100% a cannibal. Fuck, that's scary to admit. I've never admitted that before. I've cut the heart out of a living animal before and eaten it while still warm. I want to see your brain, your blood, your organs, every part of you. I would definitely bite it, 100%, or try to fuck it. Not sure which, probably both. If I fucked you into a vegetative state, I'd keep you, feed you, watch you, and keep fucking you till you're sore and broken. I can't stop thinking of fucking your actual brain. Brand you, tattoo you, mark you, shave your head, and keep your hair with me, cut a piece of your skin off and make you cook it for me. Whose slave-master relationship is the strongest? We'd win. When I tell you to slit your wrists and use the blood for anal.
Oh, God.
And then this is trigger warning, sexual assault, trigger warning. Raping you on your floor with a knife against you. Everything else seemed boring. You crying and screaming, me standing over you. I felt like a god. I've never felt such power or intensity.
The quote, everything else is boring, is one of the most terrifying things I have ever heard.
Yep.
So happy that his wife got out.
Yep.
But also, like, I want to like cut off a toe so I can keep a piece of you, and like how much he wants to like eat and like physically devour parts of a human, and the fact that he lets his son put his toes in his mouth, not his son's toes, like Armie lets his son Ford put Armie's toes in Ford's mouth. I only did that for clarification and to prove that I was listening to all of the family drama, because I do have a sheet with a lot of chicken scrawl on it, and the names I've all circled to remember to reference back.
I appreciate it. It's very confusing, and I appreciate that you've specified. Yes, and that is what people are saying now. Obviously, that's an example that they're using, of course, that again, and I know, again, look, and listen, don't turn on us yet. I'm going to get into like all the details of all of this, and you know, there's lots to come about what these kinks necessarily are or aren't, etc. But at the end of the day, you know, again, it's extreme. It's extreme. It's extreme. And certainly people are drawing the connection that you just did as well. So now at House of Effie says she was 20 when she met Armie on Facebook in 2016. She says she fell in love with him instantly and that the relationship progressed very rapidly with emotions running high. Looking back, she says she can now see the clear manipulation tactics that he was using and that she always tried to dismiss his actions as being a twisted form of love. She says he would often test her devotion to him, adding that he became increasingly violent with her. She said he abused her mentally, emotionally, and sexually. Now, the sharing of those screenshots, again, because some people were like, there's no proof these are real. Well, it inspired two other women to come forward. First was a woman named Courtney Vucikovic. I'm so sorry. We'll call her Courtney. Armie was on a flight out of the Cayman Islands last June. This is when he had just split up with his wife, Elizabeth Chambers. The same trip, I will remind you that he allegedly accidentally sent Elizabeth a text that was meant for someone else. So he messaged Courtney on Instagram for the first time. She says the DMs came fast and furious. The actor immediately started spilling about his tense situation with what he described as his, quote, crazy family. He described near fistfights with his father and a short-lived escape plan that involved taking a fishing boat to Cuba. Within the first 5 minutes, he was basically like, quote, this all goes back to my horrible childhood, she said. It's not the most romantic thing, but we bonded over past trauma. Armie earned her sympathy, according to Courtney, through full court press. She said, day one, he makes you feel bad for him. It's when he makes himself look like a victim. Then he love bombs you like crazy. You've never felt more special in your entire life. I've never seen anything like it. We're in a restaurant. I'm sitting across from him and he pulls my chair over right next to him in front of everybody and is hugging and kissing you. You're the only girl in the whole world. And then he starts the manipulation and then the darker stuff. One of the most shocking things that I realized he did to other women is he says that he never tied up a human being before, only mannequins, she said. I remember thinking, like, that's got to be true because that's the weirdest fucking thing I've ever heard. Who would lie about that? That's weirder than saying I've tied up 25 people. So I guess he would say, I've practiced tying up mannequins, but I've never tied up a person. I really want to. And she is saying like, well, anyone who would admit that must be telling the truth when in reality, he's probably tied up other women. She went on to explain that one encounter, which took place on an evening in Sedona, Arizona, left her with regret. Armie, she said, was drinking heavily and persuaded her to participate in a bondage scenario that she was not comfortable with. He sulked. He got cold and angry. He tried to convince her. And then she said, I eventually consented, but really regretted doing so. As messy as it is, Courtney said she felt like it was a real relationship. He introduced her to his mother, Drew, and had talked about bringing her to the Dominican Republic while he was going to be filming a romantic comedy with Jennifer Lopez. That movie is shooting now. I know people on that movie. And he was dropped from that movie. He's trying to make claims that otherwise you can hear from me and just believe me. He was dropped from the movie because of all of this.
And he's not a romantic lead.
They were trying to make him one, but yes,
he's 100%.
He's trying to say that it was other reasons, and just trust me. I don't need to give my own sources, but just trust me. He was fired. Period. So just as fast as their relationship formed in June and intensified, the two were spending nearly every day together. She says it ended in September 2020, and she immediately checked herself into a treatment program for trauma. So in September, the same month, the then 22-year-old Paige Lorenz met Armie. They dated for around 4 months. She too got an immediate barrage of sordid family details and secrets. A lot of really dark stuff, she said. I felt confused. Why was he telling me this stuff so instantly? It was stuff I would never share off the bat. He said his grandfather was this kind of very scary person who had these crazy sex parties where there would be guns. But she said there was also an unmistakable tone of awe coming from Armie, like he thought it was cool and was proud of his grandfather in a way. Armie took Paige to Texas also to meet his mother. like he had with Courtney. She enjoyed the trip because she said it felt like a normal relationship thing to do, but suspected that Armie's relationship with his mother was complicated. His mother apparently spoke of the devil trying to take Armie, and she was worried that he didn't believe in God. Paige said that Drew let the two of them sleep in a bedroom together, jokingly pulling out a ruler and saying they needed to stay 6 feet apart. And then she started grilling about religious beliefs. After a few days, Paige said that Drew opened up to her about how she was so worried about Armie and grateful because she felt that Paige was a good influence on him. Great. During their time together, Paige said Armie did not have any money. She said that she paid for everything and that Armie was only getting by on loans from his friends. She says she broke things off from him after he started making rules for her for things she could and couldn't do, who she could and couldn't have over. He said that she couldn't have anyone else in her bed. And then she says, quote, I just started to feel really unsafe and really sick to my stomach about things. I was also emotionally dependent on him. She ended the relationship over text because, and I quote, you never know what you're going to get with him. He's kind of a scary person. She moved back to the East Coast since then, says she wants nothing to do with the entertainment business and has never planned to speak or think about him again. But when she saw House of Effie's screenshots, her stomach drops and she said, quote, holy fuck. He would say things like that to me. Weird stuff like, I want to eat your ribs. The scariest part of it is that she says she did love him in a way. I would have let him do kind of anything. He had a certain hold over me. Paige says she was subjected to brutal and painful treatment from the actor as a part of his sexual fantasies. She said that Armie said he wanted to find a doctor in LA to remove the ribs that she didn't need. He said he has a smoker in his house in LA, that he wanted to smoke it and eat it. Initially, she said she thought he was joking, but he asked me 5 times. So over time, it became a more serious thing. He would always say, I wonder what it tastes like. I bet it tastes good. Courtney also said similar things, that he would talk about wanting to eat her ribs. In November 2020, Paige said that Armie carved an A into her pelvis to brand her as his. He basically tied me up and he was doing knife play. Knife play makes me the most uncomfortable out of everything that has happened. He looks over me and says, where am I going to put my initials on you? He chose a spot and he did it, she recounted. I remember it being uncomfortable. I don't remember how it felt in that moment because I was in so much pain, she said. She also said she remembered him licking the blood from the wound and that he later told her he bragged about it to his friends. Someone even sent Paige screen grabs of text conversations that Armie had had with them bragging about this. Paige also said that Armie would bruise her during sex and send photos of her naked body to people without her consent. And she has been sent those screen grabs as well from other people. She asked Armie, how am I supposed to see other people when I have bruises? And he encouraged her to show off the bruises, to be proud of them. But when she said, how am I supposed to show other people this? He said, yeah, that's the point. Yeah. She says that the photos were taken without her knowledge and sent to other people without her knowledge. Paige describes Armie as an out-of-control narcissistic sexual deviant whose wild fantasies and BDSM-fueled desires could seriously injure another woman. She also noted that he was fixated on biting her, begging that she allow him to take lumps of her flesh from her arm before consuming them. He really thought that his fantasies were normal behavior in the BDSM non-normative sexual kink community. I thought that this was what it was. I thought I was safe, she said. But any man who's fantasizing about crushing bones, eating them, having sex with limp female bodies is a danger to all women. She also said that she was often left with bruises from using a paddle. I was his own real-life Christian Grey fantasy. There were teeth marks and bites all over me, she said. There's also an Instagram post that we can put on truecrimeandcocktails.com and on the Instagram that she just posted, and you can see on like different parts of her, like just various Instagram posts of hers, that she's covered in bruises. And the posts weren't about that. It's just like in her posts, she's beaten or whatever. She has bruises all over her.
I'm going to need to start some new justice hashtags.
Yeah. So Paige has gone on to say that she spoke up about this for several reasons. First of all, she wanted to support the other women coming forward. She wanted to hold Armie accountable for what she claims he did to her and to open up conversations about consent. Consent, she says, is really complicated. Even if it's consenting, Sharky, my cat, he's in the, Jesus. Consent is really complicated. Even if it's consenting to be something in vanilla sex that you don't really want to do and say yes to, it can be really traumatizing. She said that she hopes to start an organization that can advocate for safe sex and women learning how to say no. I did also notice, just in my research, that there did seem to be some beef on Twitter between Effie and Paige, but ultimately Paige kept saying, I appreciate Effie for coming out. I agree. I appreciate you speaking your truth. So it's hard to see, like, I don't know what the details were there or weren't. Ultimately, it did seem like they were on okay terms. Now, update. March 2021, at House of Effie has formally accused Armie Hammer of sexual assault. She claims on April 24th, 2017, Armie Hammer violently raped her for over 4 hours in Los Angeles, during which he repeatedly slammed her head against a wall, bruising her face. He also committed other acts of violence against her, to which she says she did not consent. She says that he beat her feet with a crop so they would hurt with every step she took for the next week. She said, during those 4 hours, I tried to get away, but he wouldn't let me. I thought he was going to kill me. The alleged assault ended, she says, when Hammer left her with no concern for her well-being. She said she felt in love with him at the time. She tried very hard to justify his actions, even to the point of responding to him in a way that did not reflect her true feelings. She says, I have lived in fear of him, and I have tried to dismiss his actions as a twisted kind of love. His abuse traumatized me. Now, I just want to say this is very common in these cases and is often used against women. So it's not uncommon that women who have gone through traumas with, different men, I'll say men specifically, just because it connects to this. I know there was a case against Jiyoung Gameshi, for example, in Canada, who was somebody who was physically abusing women. And then those women, they found texts that they had reached out to him after the fact, and lawyers were arguing like, well, she must have not been that upset about it if she reached out to him after the fact. Lots of experts have gone on record as saying that people who've gone through trauma want to try and rationalize it to themselves in many ways, including trying to convince themselves that they're okay with it, that they liked it, that all of these things. So that can involve trying to reach back out to the person, to trying to keep a relationship with them, to try and make it feel like what they experienced was consensual, when in reality it wasn't, and they weren't okay with it. So I just want to go on record as saying, again, I don't believe that should be any form of defense for a lawyer to take. And I think it's gross. And it is, again, very consistent, and experts, psychologists, all of the above will say it is not uncommon for people who have gone through trauma to maintain contact with their abuser, because that is a coping mechanism. And I just want to make that clear, that I don't think that just because a victim maintains contact or makes it seem like they want continue or even does maintain contact with their abuser, that does not mean that abuse didn't take place, is my point. So Effie says she's been haunted by flashbacks so excruciating she's contemplated suicide. She felt it was important to press charges. Her lawyer, Gloria Allred, says that House of Effie has provided what she thinks might be relevant evidence to law enforcement. And then it's up to law enforcement, who, of course, has launched an investigation since then. She also has said that she feels guilt for not speaking out sooner, because she feels like maybe she could have helped other people not become victims. She's moved to Europe since then as a result of wanting to get away from this. She also says she wants other survivors of sexual assault around the world to feel empowered. Of course, there was a press conference when House of Effie went public saying that he, raped her. Moments after that press conference, Armie's lawyer, Andrew Bretler, sent out a strongly worded response, as well as a screenshot, again, showing messages that Effie had apparently sent to Armie Hammer, basically trying to undermine and refute her allegations. I've already spoken to it. I don't think that's proof of anything personally. He basically is saying that she wanted all of it, that, Armie Hammer was only responding to House of Effie's wants, etc. It should also be noted again, House of Effie was 20 at the time. And I'm not saying that 20-year-old women don't know what they want, but it should also be noted that I think he was an older person who was in a place of power, etc., etc.
Also, they were his text messages to her about, I want to do this to you. Things are otherwise, it's just boring if I don't get to do whatever. I think that was a message to somebody else. But the point is, he's the one that was sending messages that were like, I want to like literally eat you.
Yep.
So, yeah.
100%. 100%. Of course, the lawyer is maintaining that all of Armie's interactions with everybody were completely consensual, et cetera, et cetera. But this obviously does raise conversation about consent, about BDSM boundaries, the intersection of abuse claims, social media, all of the above. It should also be noted again that I do think the BDSM community, and I will not speak for them because I'm not a personal member of that community, but I do think people in that community would say that there's no room for debate. From what I understand, in that community, if you're a member of that community and you are two consenting partners who are entering into a sexual or whatever you want to label it situation, it's made very clear ahead of time what the boundaries are. And I think the whole point here is that these girls were not members of that community. They do not identify as members of that community. They were kind of brought into this thing that maybe they were like, okay, I guess we're like being open-minded or whatever. And again, the whole point is that I respect people who are members of that community and exist in that community, obviously, because they have very open communication and that everybody is doing everything consensually because there is very clear communication. And I would bet that people in that community would say that this wouldn't happen in their community because the consent is very clear ahead of time and everyone knows exactly where everyone is coming from. And this, it feels like it wasn't, that it was just very young girls are being targeted by this very handsome, very successful actor. Again, speculation, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I also love that this is not the time, but you've said it. So now Blanche has to come in.
Please.
He's not my type.
I love that Blanche doesn't care for Armie Hammer. I love it.
Look, there is just something about him that just something very robotic about him that I just don't respond to. Blanche responds to almost everyone else. But he is just not somebody that, not that it matters one way or the other if he is attractive or not. But my point is just, it feels like he didn't get the consent that you need, especially in a situation like that. Again, I am neither in that community, but I just feel like if you're going to be in that community, again, this is just assumptions that I'm making. There is a lot of trust there amongst partners. And it just feels so gross to me for anyone to take advantage of anyone in general, but especially in like a trusting situation, especially when you're the older person in that situation and the younger person is just like kind of in awe of you because you're this 6'5" Hollywood star. So of course they're like, well, this must be normal. They probably don't have a lot of things to compare it to. So they just assume, oh, this must be normal. And they just go with it. And then they're like, but I really did not like that.
Because 100%. And at the end of the day, I think that and people can message me and come for me if you want, but I think at the end of the day, the things that he's talking about, this isn't just, I'm going to look, I'm some drinks in, but like, this is some intermediate to advanced level stuff. This isn't just, I want you to call me daddy. I'm using that as a, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, that isn't just a couple of rogue spanks. And this isn't me speaking again glibly about that community. I'm saying this in that I do believe that that community exists because, again, everyone is in there and there is that communication and everyone's clear on what's happening. And you're not going after 20-year-old girls you find on Instagram and then all of a sudden talking about cannibalistic fantasies, which whether or not you would ever actually, fulfill those is debatable. And I'm sure there's people who have those fantasies that never would act on those. I get it. But that's a pretty high level of kink to me to bring to a 20-year-old girl that you've just met on Instagram that you've known for less than 4 months, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing when both people have consented because it's something they're both into. It's a completely other thing to be like, I'm just going to do this anyway.
Exactly.
Without saying to you outright that I'm going to do this. And I mean, from the sounds of it, she probably would have said no at some point and like, this needs to stop. And like, I'm like, it must have been obvious she was not having a good time or that
they didn't,
any of them,
Totally. And the bottom line is that they didn't meet, as far as I know. And if this information comes out, fine, then I'll eat crow. But they didn't meet. They weren't in like a BDSM community chat room. That's not where they met. Do you know what I mean? It's not like he went after very, very pretty, very, very, very young girls on Instagram and Facebook. It wasn't like he met them in a community place where that shit maybe could come out and it would be with a person who was on that level. You're bringing this to people again that, in my opinion, personally, are not equipped. You're a person of privilege. You're a person of power. You're a person who's older, more successful. You're a Golden Globe nominated actor. Anyway, so people around them have said they think it's just his dark sense of humor, whatever. Other people around him have said like, oh, he's just made some missteps. But no one around him that said those things will go on the record. Isn't that interesting? No one will come to his defense publicly using their name. I find that very interesting.
Well, they have to be able to say in court what they really think when the truth comes out.
Exactly. So after all of this, he left the Cayman Islands, and we're going to get into that timeline in a little bit, but he left the Cayman Islands. He went back to the Cayman Islands again after his split to visit his children. And he posted on that private Instagram account I was talking about. He posted at this point a video giving a tour of his hotel room. And basically it's like, he's in the hallway and he's like, oh, here I am in the hallway. Here's my room. Oh, here's the bathroom. Here's whatever. Here's my bed. And then on the bed is a woman on all fours in lingerie with a bright red slapped butt. Like, just like, you like slap skin, like a hand, like a red handprint, like her whole butt is like that. And he makes a comment that's basically like, bed looks comfy. That looks pretty good. And then he keeps going. Like, it's just part of the tour. Like, she's basically an object. She's a lamp. She's a prop. She's a lamp in the room. And I understand some people could say, oh, he was just being funny, whatever. But it was also just like unnecessary. You're also on that trip to try and see your children. Later, he posted a still image of that same woman on the bed. And then he wrote, well, my ex, for a very good reason, wife is refusing to come back to America with my children. So I have to go back to Cayman, which sucks, except there are a few silver linings, like fucking Miss Cayman again while I'm down there. He later issued an apology and clarification saying the woman in the picture was not the actual Miss Cayman. I think he was just using that as like, of course she wasn't Miss Cayman. But again, I was just like, the biggest point to all of that is, what are you doing, dude? What are you doing? Why? You're there to see your kids. Stop it. That woman on the bed is clearly going to fuck you either way. Why the exhibitionism? Another post he wrote around that time said, quote, divorce is so fun, not as fun as drugs, but what is? And that, my friends, brings us to the drug posts. So in one, he talked about testing negative for a drug test because his wife demanded that he take drug tests prior to seeing the children. He's had one where he said, I had THC and benzos in my piss, but who doesn't?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
He also had a screenshot he shared at some point of a court order that stated he needed to take the drug test in order to see his kids. And I'm like, why are you sharing that? In another video, he was taking a hit from a vape box, smiling into the camera. And then the caption was, when you realize they don't test for DMT on drug tests. And I was like, what's DMT? I'll tell you what DMT is. It stands for dimethyltryptamine, which is a chemical substance that occurs in plants and animals, which is both a derivative and a structural analog of tryptamine. Okay. It's a recreational psychedelic drug and is prepared by various cultures for ritual purposes as an entheogen. Sometimes it's referred to as, quote, Dimitri. So people have asked, is it ayahuasca? DMT is the main active ingredient in ayahuasca. Now, if people know of ayahuasca, I mean, listen, how much time do you have? But basically, that's something that's prepared usually, I believe, as a tea. And I've never done it, but there are like, I'm really kind of bastardizing these details, but it's like a shaman will take you on like a spiritual journey and they'll have you drink ayahuasca and you kind of go on this mind quest. It is a hallucinogenic, kind of like magic mushrooms, that like kind of thing. Situation. Yes, like a peyote. Exactly.
That is not from experience.
Listen, no, but you're on the money. So it's that kind of vibe. Synthetic DMT usually comes in a white crystal powder. It can be smoked in a pipe, vaporized, injected, or snorted. It seemed like he was vaping it. It can also be put in a tea, like I was saying. Mental side effects of DMT include euphoria, floating, vivid hallucinations, altered sense of time, depersonalization. There's also, of course, lingering mental effects that will last for days or weeks after use. Other physical effects include rapid heart rate, increased blood pressure, visual disturbances, dizziness, dilated pupils, agitation, paranoia, rapid rhythmic eye movements, chest pain, tightness, diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting. My papers are going everywhere. It's also been associated with comas, respiratory arrest, confusion, etc. But my point I'm only trying to bring here is that says to me that in the time, and this is important, in the time he was last in the Cayman Islands, which would have been in this last summer, 2020, before he came back to the US, he has confirmed that he was taking DMT. And we know that it can cause for days and weeks these side effects, which brings us to summer 2020. And this is when things are going to get wild, ladies and gentlemen. So buckle up. So summer 2020, Armie comes back to the US. This is prior to so this DMT we're talking about, I'm not exactly sure of the exact dates, but I'm lending credence to when he's back and forth during this time. We know he has access to these drugs and he's doing these drugs. Summer 2020, Armie gets a construction job. A what? So in late August on his birthday, he revealed on an Instagram post, so I believe this was August 28th, that he had been doing construction work for 2 months. August 28th. This is important. He said around 2 months. Great. So that was on Armie Hammer's public Instagram, not that creepy private one that he also has. He had a post about his friend Ashton Ramsey, who he later revealed in an interview with Jimmy Kimmel that aired in October 2020 that he had been helping fix up an old motel in the desert in California near Joshua Tree National Park in a town called 29 Palms. That's important. So Ashton Ramsey bought that property in 29 Palms, and basically Armie Hammer and his wife Elizabeth Chambers had been quarantining in the Cayman Islands with their kids. He took off. The exact date of which I can't find. And again, I'll get into that in a bit because I tried to lay out a timeline from what I could find. But anyway, at some point in that summer, he flies back to the US and he goes to 29 Palms, which is near Palm Springs in California. And he starts fixing up this abandoned motel, doing constructions with this friend, Ashton of his. So he also mentions in this interview that aired on TV with Jimmy Kimmel that there was a man named Motor Mike, who Armie described as a, quote, desert creature desert creature with a mountain bike. He's an amazing character, Armie said. He's one of those people who lives in the desert and he can kind of do anything. He can really do anything. It's pretty spectacular. He went on to tell a very charming story about how Motor Mike, my God, the booze. Motor Mike was able to train wild road runners using Flamin' Hot Cheetos. He would like use hot Cheetos as treats and he would like train the road runners to do things. And as Armie Hammer was telling the story to Jimmy Kimmel, I found myself going like, I get it. Like the story was so funny and so charming. And he's like talking about this like very kind of, over the top character, this Motor Mike guy. And then he was able to train these. And it was just like, I consider myself to be a very good storyteller. Like I'm a good anecdote teller, etc. And just watching Armie Hammer tell this story, I was like, I see. Like he's very charming. He's very charismatic. It was like one of those moments where when I was watching the video, I found myself liking him. Like I found myself going like, oh, he's charming. And then I was like, see, that's the problem. But honestly, and I say that because I found myself watching this going like, oh my God, he's so funny. He's such a good storyteller. And then I was like, Lauren, that's the problem. Anyway. So, what else is there to the story? Who knows? Why are you guys covering this on True Crime and Cocktails? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that in the past 14 months, the remains of 6 bodies have been found in 29 Palms and surrounding areas. We are talking 6 bodies that have been found within a 10-minute drive from the motel that Armie was fixing up with his friend Ashton in 29 Palms. 6 bodies. And remains. I should say remains because I'm not sure the decomposition rate.
Do we know, and I may be jumping ahead of your notes, do
Yeah.
we know how long that those bodies were there?
We do. And I will get into each one because each one is specific.
Okay.
We're 2 seconds from there. You're so close. Yes. So TikTok, there have been some sleuthers on TikTok, and they have talked about the fact that there is a narrative, there is a conspiracy theory that Armie Hammer is a serial killer and that some of these bodies can be attributed potentially to him. So that's the reason why I wanted to do this in this episode to begin with, because I thought it was interesting. He's in the news. I think it's important to also draw attention to, very powerful men who are taking advantage of their place of power to abuse women. But when I started to dig into this again, I can't believe what I'm even going to talk about in the next few minutes because you'll see. Anyway, so does Armie Hammer have a history of violent sex? Yes. Has he admitted to being on DMT around the time that some of these people went missing? He has. Have there been multiple statements that he made about quarantine making him crazy? But multiple statements about how he hates it, he hates quarantine, etc. There are. Could the stars have aligned for him to kill these people? Well, let's decide together, huh? 6 bodies, or should I say 6 human remains have been found. 4 of them have been identified. 2 have not. We'll talk about the ones that have not first. First of all, remains were found July 22nd, 2020. Those have not been identified. And sometimes because of decomposition, it does take them some time. Number 2. Remember number 2. They will not say what day these remains were found, but they will say that they were discovered approximately a quarter mile south of Amboy Road and Wilson Road. Just remember number 2. I'll walk you through it.
Okay.
Now I'm going to walk you through the identified remains. First, we have Tawny Marie Camarillo, also known as Tawny Hill. How do I know this? Because I deep dived.
Of course you did. Like a goddamn boss.
I learned it from you. 38 years old. She went missing May 2019. She was last seen on May 13th in Yucca Valley, which is where she lived. She was reported missing May 14th, the next day. Her skeletal remains were found February 12th, 2020. I dug, and they have not released any information that I dug about her cause of death. There was mention of mental health issues and that she left her house without shoes on. And that was it. We're going to get into all of it. Trust me. So let's just put a pin in each one of these details. Okay. The next person is a man named Paul Miller. He was 51. He went missing in July of 2018. His remains were found December 23rd, 2019. He was identified by dental records. Again, his remains were found a year and a half later. So decomposition, obviously. He was Canadian. He was there with his wife in Joshua Tree area. He told his wife he was going to go on one more hike before they were going to head back to Guelph, Ontario. He left her around 9. At noon, she notified officials that he had not returned. They used sniffer dogs at the time, could not locate him. And then again, a year and a half later, they found him.
Oh, God.
Okay. The next person, and I'm going a little out of order time-wise, but you'll understand why.
Okay.
James Escalante, who was 56 years old. He was also known by the name Blackhawk. He went missing June 25th, 2020. He left his house on his bicycle to help a friend who had called and said that she had become stuck. Her car had become stuck in sand. He couldn't find her. When he couldn't find her, he called his girlfriend, who was also friends with the woman he was going to help. And that was the last anyone had heard from him. On August 8th, 2020, a man who was going shooting in the desert found a badly decomposed body on Shelton Road in Wonder Valley. Police say foul play was not suspected. And I dug and could not find a cause of death. Now we get to a woman named Erica Lloyd. She was 37. She was reported missing June 17th, 2020. Her remains were discovered January 31st, 2021. Erica was a single mom. She worked as a hairdresser. She was living in the Bay Area in a place called Walnut Creek. She left there on Thursday, June 11th. And she said she was going to go camping in Joshua Tree National Park. COVID had apparently gotten her pretty broken down. It had really affected her business. Obviously, I believe she either owned her own salon. She was definitely a hairdresser. I think she may have owned her own salon, but she worked at a salon. And so she has a 12-year-old son that she left in the care of a friend. She leaves. Of note, before she left Walnut Creek, she deleted her Facebook account. Of note. She remained active on Instagram until June 15th. According to her sister-in-law, she said that Erica was under a lot of stress and she just wanted to get away and unplug. Someone, this is an unconfirmed report, said that Erica was going to meet a friend. They could not, say the identity, the gender, or anything, but that she was going to meet a friend who moved to 29 Palms in April 2020. And there was speculation that maybe she had gone to visit that person. So apparently the evidence suggests that Erica left Walnut Creek, excuse me. She left Walnut Creek, which is over 500 miles away, drove to Joshua Tree, June 11th, camped at the Jumbo Rocks campground the nights of June 11th and June 12th, that she went back to Walnut Creek on June 13th, arriving that day, spending the night with her son and her roommate. And then on Sunday, June 14th, she went back. Okay. She told her friends that there were two people identified as James and Christian that were looking after her campsite and presumably her camping gear back in, again, this campground. On June 14th, she arrived at Jumbo Rocks campground, again, where she had been staying. But then she noted in her journal that these two, quote, friends, James and Christian, were not there. There's so many details in this. This case itself is really interesting. Her car, the next day, June 15th, was found vandalized. There was a note that was left on it to please move it. The car did get moved. The next day on June 16th, a video captured the car leaving the north entrance into Joshua Tree at 1:20 p.m. The car was later videoed passing a school in 29 Palms at 2:50 p.m. On June 16th, that same day around 4 p.m., a California highway patrolman spotted the same car parked on Shelton Road east of 29 Palms, just north of the intersection with Highway 62 facing south. Long story short, they had to call a towing company because the front windshield was smashed on the passenger side. The airbag had deployed. The radio was damaged. And in addition, there was damage to the outside front of the vehicle in the bottom of the radiator, and the air conditioning condenser was pushed backwards as if the car had hit a very large object. So it's hard to say whether the car was that damaged when it was first found on the 15th, but that's definitely how it was found on the 16th. So I start to dig into this because I'm like, this is all feeling weak. And the police are saying no foul play was seen in her car. No problem. And I'll get into the rest of her case in just a second. However, she said she was going to meet someone who moved to 29 Palms in April 2020. So I ran a few background checks.
Like a boss.
Because we know that Armie Hammer did not, and again, we'll get into his timeline in a minute too, because that's a whole other story. But Armie was going to work on this motel that had been bought by his friend Ashton Ramsey. So I ran something on Ashton Ramsey, and Ashton Ramsey owns multiple properties in the area. The most recent he purchased was in 29 Palms in April 2020. Now that doesn't tell us anything because he also owned other properties that he had bought February 2019, but it does show that he had been in the area potentially or owned properties in the area for over a year at that time. Were some of them income properties that he was renting out potentially? Is it possible that Erica was going to meet somebody who was living in an income property that this guy had? Who fucking knows, right? Who knows? So then I started cross-referencing. So I went back to one of our earlier remains, Tawny Marie Camarillo. You'll remember she was last seen in Yucca Valley where she lived on May 13th. She was reported missing the next day, May 14th. People said she left her house with no shoes on, but she had mental health issues. What if I told you that her last known address was less than 2.5 miles from another property that Armie Hammer's friend, Ashton Ramsey, owns? And what if I told you the other victim, James Escalante, who also had his remains turn up? What if I told you that this other guy, Ashton Ramsey, Armie Hammer's friend, owns 3 properties that are all between 1.3 and 1.5 miles from James Escalante, where he lived in 29 Palms. So now we know that this guy, Ashton, owns a property within 2.5 miles of where Tawny lived, who died, owns 3 properties within 1.3 and 1.5 miles of where James Escalante lived. And now we're talking about Erica Lloyd, whose cell phone her friends just kept calling. And they were like, what if we just keep calling it? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? So she was reported missing officially June 17th. On June 20th, one of her friends kept calling her phone. Someone answered. They said, where did you find her cell phone? The man said, I found it on Cottonwood Drive. Cottonwood Drive is a tiny street that is less than a mile long. That is less than a half a mile from the fucking motel that Armie Hammer and Ashton Ramsey were fucking working on at the time.
And you had told us that in August 28th of 2020, Armie Hammer said he'd been working construction in 29 Palms for the last 2 months. And she went missing around the 2-month mark with him being there.
So she left her house in Walnut Creek on June 11th. She went and stayed there the 12th and the 13th. She went back home to Walnut Creek. She came back to the 29 Palms area on June 14th. Okay. At that time, she said there was 2 guys she was meeting up with, James and Christian. Now, Christian just sticks in my mind because Paige Lorenz referred to Armie Hammer as Christian Grey. So I'm also just like have it in my head that I'm like, oh my God, were those fake names that Ashton and Armie we're using.
James,
that's a massive leap, but
James easily, like I could see James being a Ramsey sort of almost reference. And I kind of took Christian as like his mother was very religious.
That too.
But Christian Grey makes a hell of a lot of sense to me.
So she came back on June 14th. These friends of hers were supposed to be like guarding her stuff at this campsite. Her camping gear was located at that campsite in Jumbo Rocks campground, but an expensive Yeti cooler she did not own was also found among those possessions at the campsite. Now, this is a very kind of humble area. What kind of people would have a very expensive Yeti cooler? I don't know, 2 Hollywood douchebags fixing up a motel?
Mm-hmm.
I want to remind you, the motel that her cell phone was found less than a half a mile from. So then I started to think, okay, hold on, Lauren, don't jump ahead. How big is 29 Palms? Okay, because yes, he owns these properties that are close to these people, close to the phone, whatever. 29 Palms is 58.76 square miles. That's a pretty reasonably sized town. And Yucca Valley, which is the town where Tawny lived, is 39.83 square miles. So these are towns of 100 people where, yeah, everybody lives within a mile of one another. The fact to me that Ashton Ramsey owns these properties that are between 2.5 and a half mile of where either these people lived or evidence was found, does that not feel like a huge connection?
You might not know this, but do we know officially who supposedly found the cell phone?
We don't. And also, let's for a second take a step back. I'm not even going to say, this is not me saying that I'm speculating that Armie Hammer or his friend Ashton did these murders. But let's also remember Armie Hammer going on Jimmy Kimmel talking about, oh, there's this desert creature man called Motor Mike who is around, who clearly Ashton is using as this handyman kind of jack of all trades. So that's someone who could potentially have had access to all of those properties that Ashton owned, who then would bring him close to not only where James Escalante, who died, and Tawny Camarillo / Tawny Hill died, but then also that's close to where the cell phone of Erica Lloyd was found. Like, doesn't that feel like a huge fucking deal? And the cops saying that this is completely no foul play, no foul play, no foul play. Okay. And you know what? At the end of the day, you're right. Synchronicity, it could all be a coincidence. But to me, it just feels like, do they know this?
I maybe have been doing this show for too long, which is amazing to say 5 months in. But my gut is like, tell me that they pinged her cell phone at various points. Like, tell me that they've looked into where it was throughout time. Like, I want to know, how did it get to that little street?
They won't release that information. So again, my question is this though. If you're telling me no foul play was involved, release that information.
Yeah.
If that information is meaningless, great. Prove me wrong then. Release the information. Right? Here's the other thing. Okay. This is the other thing that's crazy. So you remember body number 2? And I said, remember body number 2?
You told me to say
remember that one?
because that's the second unidentified body.
Thank you very much. It was found in almost the exact same spot that Erica Lloyd was found. And Erica Lloyd went missing from almost the exact same spot that James Escalante went missing from. Very, very, very close. And I can make these maps and post them and whatever. My point is that Erica Lloyd's family hired someone, okay? They hired this person, and I'm scanning my notes, and his name will eventually come out to me. So just go with me because I'm going to keep talking until I see it. Yeah. But they hired an expert to look for her, who is very familiar with the area and caves, etc. His last name is Billings. There it is. And while he was looking for Erica, he found James Escalante's bike. Again, James Escalante and Erica Lloyd both went missing within about 8 or 9 days of one another. Okay, from almost exactly the same spot. These are like, again, and I understand maybe I'm reading into too much into this, but why is the police withholding the information about that second body? The second body, we know where it was found, but they won't tell us when. So was it found around the same time that James Escalante and Erica Lloyd were found? Like, did you know what I mean? Like, there's so many questions here. So many questions. To me, it's very troubling that it's just being labeled as, oh, these are just, these things happen in the desert, etc. They're like, due to the damage on Erica's car, it looks like she got into an accident, was kind of like befuddled, got out of the car, walked for 2 miles and died. Okay, but her car was also found abandoned once. They left a note on it saying to move it. And then it was moved and then found even more damaged. So my point is like, how do we know that she moved it? How do we know that she didn't go missing after that first time?
Just because her car was seen, unless you can prove in the video of seeing the car multiple times, unless that video is so good you can see the driver, you can't confirm if she's the one who drove it. Just because she owns the car doesn't mean she moved it.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, I'm sorry, but like Billings, again, who was hired to look for her, he was an expert on the area, caves, etc. He said her body was discovered less than a week after heavy rains occurred in the desert. If she had been buried in a shallow grave, he said, the heavy flow of water that occurred might have carried the earth on top of her away, leaving her body exposed, whereupon she would have been found on January 31st. These were the first heavy rains since she went missing. And so it's possible that that's why she was found. This is what he said. He said also that you could tell potentially based on her clothes, if they had been bleached or not been bleached by the sun. So if one side of her corpse was not significantly more bleached than the other, that could disprove the theory that no foul play was involved. So if she just randomly went somewhere and died, then the sun would be bleaching this side of your clothes, and the clothes that were against the ground would be normal. Yes. But if she had been buried, then all of her clothes would have looked the same. That's an easy way to tell, in my opinion. I agree with this guy. And then he said, I am by no means an expert on forensics, with my specialty being local geography. But that was his kind of point that he was making. So I found that interesting too. Why did he feel the need to say that? Why are they not releasing the other details about the other sets of remains? So then I'm like, well, now I have to try and piece together when Armie Hammer was there, because that's what this episode is about. So he said, as you said, on August 28th, in his birthday post about Ashton, that he had been working in 29 Palms for around 2 months. So we also know that he traveled from the Cayman Islands to the US sometime in June. So I went through his social media. I couldn't find anything concrete, but on June 11th, he tweeted, hey, quick question. If I can use my cell phone to clear customs without a passport, I can deposit checks and pay bills. I can send any random object to any place in the world. Why can't I vote by phone? Who does it do a disservice to keep Americans from voting early? So my question is, did he have going through customs on his mind because he was possibly traveling that day? Because if that's the case, that was the day that Erica would have arrived in the 29 Palms area. So what I'm saying is, were they supposed to meet there that day? He didn't show up. She stayed a couple nights. She went back home. He was like, come back to meet me. I'll be there on the 14th, which she did. That's when they met. That's why their cooler was there with her stuff. Just saying. She was also 5'4", 125 pounds. Beautiful. Just saying. Police have said there was, again, as I said before, there was no signs of foul play in Erica's car, and that they are, quote, not investigating Armie Hammer as a suspect. They said that it was just, she got into this accident and wandered off and died. So then I started to think, okay, so let's say that he and his friend are not involved in this. And also, I want to reiterate again, I'm not necessarily saying that it was them, but this Motor Mike character, again, who are the other people who have been working on these properties or have access to these properties that all have connections to the locations where these people have been? Let's say all of that is wrong. Okay. None of that matters. It's all a coincidence. So then I started asking myself, well, who else could have been involved? So then I started doing a little Google. As of March 27th, 2021, there are 71 registered sex offenders living in 29 Palms. 3 of them have the first name Michael, Motor Mike, just saying. Mm-hmm. Now, I know it's like hard to keep track of like, what does that mean? How are these people, whatever. So for context, that's 370 people to every sex offender. But California is 721 people to every sex offender. So this is actually very high. There's a very high population of registered sex offenders in 29 Palms. And then I was like, I got to look into this and why. And that's when I discovered something truly fucking shocking. So, and I'll try and get through this as fast as I can. There is something that they call sexually violent predators. And I'll get into that in a second. But this is a specific label. It's a legal label. It's a court label. It's a state label, whatever. That is the term SVP that they put on certain people. And usually it involves, people who have reoccurred in that kind of arena. And I found something posted March 18th, 2021 about an SVP, a sexually violent predator who raped multiple children, who was ordered to live in 29 Palms. So this man is named Lotus Donald Roden. Okay. His crimes date back more than 50 years. He's now 71. He was first convicted on the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl in Cocoa Beach. He lured her back to his apartment where officials say he raped her 3 different times. He was found guilty of felony lewd and lascivious acts with a child under the age of 14. He was sentenced to 14 months in a state mental hospital and 12 years in prison. So I'm going to really kind of like, I can post all of this information somewhere else, but I'm going to skip over it to give you the lowlights here, including he ended up in Southern California while he was on parole. So he did his time. He was paroled. And then in April and June 1984, he sexually assaulted 3 other girls, 2 who were 14, 1 who was 17. The crimes occurred in LA and Orange counties. He was convicted in 3 capes of rape by force, forceful sexual penetration, sexual battery, and forcible rape. In December 1984, when those California crimes were still under investigation, he raped a girl who was 13 in Tennessee. He was convicted of rape and using a minor for obscene purposes in that case. So apparently he had this whole grift where he pretended to be a photographer and was luring the girls to offering modeling photo shoots. It's awful. It's awful. It's awful. It's awful. He received state prison terms of 20, 12, and 6 years, respectively, by courts in Tennessee, Orange County, and LA County. On top of that, he also was like scamming people out of money to the tune of $440,000. Jesus. Yes, he got out of prison in 2004. He was detained in an Orange County jail. After then, when he was filed as an SVP, a sexually violent predator. So then he was committed to the California Department of State Hospitals. 15 years after that, they ordered his conditional release. So, and then in this year, 2021, he was ordered to live in 29 Palms because I guess people were just like, oh, it's the middle of nowhere. It's the desert. What's the problem? Of course, the people who live there, God bless, are like, please don't bring that man here, please. So then I started to dig into this a little bit more. And this isn't the first time this has happened. And there's apparently this system in the state of California. And listen, I ran out of time. I did not get into, again, all of the state laws in all of the states in the United States. But there are these rules where certain sex predators can be labeled in this way, which means that they have to go through these programs in mental hospitals. And then eventually they are considered, I guess, rehabilitated or what have you. And then they are released to the public. And usually the people, from what I've been reading, are people who have recommitted. So they've been charged, they've done their time, they've been released, they commit again, they get back in prison again. Okay. And this brought me to another case, Ross Walschlager, okay, who's been at a state mental hospital since the 90s, getting treatment for mental disorders that apparently contributed to his behavior in Ventura in the 1980s. This was somebody who also had raped women and children, okay? And in his case, in Ross's case, which I'm going to say because his last name is difficult to say, basically he did his time. He did this time in a state hospital. They went through all of this treatment, etc. And then they're like, okay, he's good to be released. You have to release him to 29 Palms, take him to the middle of the desert. And I'm like, hold on a second. That's not fair to the people who live there. That's also like, what is this program? So then I start to dig into this program, and this program exists. And I will find the name eventually as I go through in my notes, but I don't know if anybody has watched the movie on Netflix called I Care a Lot, but it's basically about, it's a great movie, Peter Dinklage. And she starred with Ben Affleck in Gone Girl. Oh, I'm blanking on her name. The blonde woman. She won.
Yeah. Oh, crap.
You know who I'm talking about. She's very talented.
I do.
So the whole premise of the movie is that she's created this fake company where if you're an elderly person who is affluent, etc., she can force herself to become your ward. And then she basically takes all your money and controls your life, etc. This is basically what this real life system is talking about. And I'm wondering if the movie is slightly based on this system, because basically what this allows is this company to take these people, Liberty Healthcare, there it is. They take these people, these sexually violent predators, they get put in these mental hospitals until they, quote, apparently become rehabilitated. And then it's their job to release them, find them a place to live, connect them with their group therapy, with their monthly polygraph tests. There's a huge list of all of the different things they have to do every day. And guess what? Liberty Healthcare is paid for with state money. So that's where tax money is going to this company to continue to provide these programs to these people who, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to say right now, if you rape women and children and you do your time and you get out and you do it again, you're in there for life, in my opinion. You've done it. You should be in prison for life. If you've recommitted, goodbye. I don't fucking care if you tell me I'm a monster. They're the monsters. Fuck that.
First of all, if they're going to try and come for you, they're going to have to get through this, and it's not going to be easy.
Right?
Second of all, I agree with what you're saying, but I would also go further in, like, you do it once, you're done.
I agree with that.
I'm okay with that.
I agree with that too.
For you being like, they've reoffended and they shouldn't be allowed out. I'm the one saying they've offended once. I'm not talking a guy got caught with pot. I'm talking specifically like people, rapists and people who go after, like, assault children in some way.
Yes.
You disrespect a child.
You're done.
Yeah.
Honestly,
also,
though.
Rosamund Pike.
Thank you very much. She won the Golden Globe. She was great in that movie, but it was chilling to read this because I was like, oh my gosh, like this is exactly the same thing. And basically, this Ross Walschlager person was the first person classified as a sexually violent predator in Ventura County. Okay. And again, I'm not going to go through his whole story because we only have so much time, but basically his doctors decided that he was no longer dangerous and then he could be released. So they tried to release him into the public. Now, Liberty Healthcare's job is to find him a place to live, et cetera, et cetera. And so they couldn't find somewhere for him to live because he's a multiply timed convicted sex crime man. Mm-hmm. I'm losing it. Anyway, I'm passionate. And so he ended up living in hotels in different places, but then he was always eventually asked to leave when employees, guests, management, etc., were made aware of his past. So then, and this is where it all starts to intersect with how fucking crazy this is, he would be issued a tent by the state where this man, then lived in a riverbed. So let's get this straight for a second. This is a man who has raped multiple people, went to prison, got out, raped more people, went back to prison. You put him into a mental hospital where you say you cured him. Then you can't find him a place to live. So then the state gives him a tent and he lives in a riverbed where you can confirm that he's not offending. Also, if you want to start talking about human rights, like, wait a second. That's the way you're handling this, is giving him a tent and saying, good luck, go be fucking homeless and live in a riverbed? So then, here's the other joke. He ended up violating his situation. Now, he didn't reoffend, but he violated, it's not parole, but like the terms of his situation he violated. So he went back to the mental hospital. But now it's come out that he's back up again for getting released, which again is just wild to me. So I guess the people in 29 Palms, of course, have been like up in arms. Please don't send these people to live here. We have this very nice community. We also have, of course, children living here. Please don't do this to us. We don't feel safe, etc. And so at least in the one case, in this case, rather, that has worked. So now they cannot find him a place to live, but they also cannot prevent him from being released under these laws. So now he's being released as, quote, a transient. He has to wear a GPS monitor at all times, refrain from using alcohol or drugs, including cannabis, stay away from bars, dance club, nightclubs, or places frequented by children. If he violates any of those, he'll go back to the state hospital, but he's basically just released out on his own. Mm-hmm. That's the second one. The first one that I spoke of, that's still being debated. But it just, again, was making me realize that it's like, wait a second. So if you're sending, and I don't know what the statistics are because I did not have time, but if there's already this influx of all these registered sex offenders living in the area, and potentially the government is sending more sex offenders to live there, then is it surprising that you've had 6 bodies potentially turn up in a year when you normally do not have that many bodies? I'm not saying that all sex offenders are murderers, but again, you see where I'm going with this. So to wrap things all together before we get to the theories, because I know we're running out of time, to bring it back to Armie Hammer for a second, because I know this has gone completely crazy, but it's also wild. Apparently, according to his lawyers right now, Armie's only concern is seeing his children. Fine. He's obviously been dropped by his agency, which is WME. He's been dropped by his publicist. He was dropped by that movie, which was called Shotgun Wedding with Jennifer Lopez. Whether he wants to say he was or he wasn't, I promise you he was. He was also supposed to be in a Paramount series about the making of The Godfather. He's been dropped from that. He was in a movie that was supposed to come out in September. It's been pushed at least till 2022 now. Everything is kind of imploding for him, which is interesting because, again, of his past where, you know, for example, when Julian killed somebody, they just paid it off and it went away. Is Armie Hammer the first one in the lineage of Hammers that's actually going to have to publicly pay for his misgivings? Who knows? So, it's, you know, that's an interesting thing to think about. A person close to the family has said that they want Elizabeth to, quote, be careful, is worried about her, just given the family history. Elizabeth has also said and joked that when she looks back over the marriage, she feels like since the allegations surface, that looking back on the marriage, the only thing that makes sense to her is the Netflix movie starring Zac Efron as Ted Bundy called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. And this chilled me when I read this, because the first time I pitched to Christy that I wanted to talk about Armie Hammer, I was like, I want to make comparisons between him and Ted Bundy, not in that I'm suggesting that someone who has specific sexual proclivities is automatically a serial killer. I am not in any way saying that, but just in the idea that if Ted Bundy potentially lived in a world with the internet and access to all these other things, like, would it have stopped him from killing? Would it not have? Ted Bundy was also, you know, very attractive. He also talked about wanting to dominate. Jeffrey Dahmer is another great comparison here too, about wanting to completely control, completely dominate, which feels like what Armie Hammer is saying. Again, I'm not comparing him to serial killers, suggesting in any, I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying it's interesting. The joke is that when I started researching Armie Hammer, I was like, oh, we don't need to make that comparison. There's enough here anyway. But then when I read that Elizabeth said that, I got goosebumps because I was like, oh my gosh, his ex-wife has said the same thing that me, as someone who knows so little, glibly implied, which is chilling. People have also expressed concern about Armie's aunt Casey. She has obviously been speaking openly about the family, and some people have said that she has received a text message from someone who knows 3 generations of Hammermen saying, do not go out after dark. If you do, go in a group, park under a light and near a store entrance, valet as much as you can, be aware and beware. Always check to make sure you're not being followed. Watch your surroundings for strangers' faces that appear more than once. Chilling. Casey, of course, is near destitute. She says that she never would have seen that she, in her 20s, that she would end up having to work at a Home Depot. Of course, because they had so much money, which all eventually went away. Her inheritance, she said, lasted her 18 years, but she's been getting by on her own ever since. This also chilled me. She said, I'm going to walk into WME and tell them you got rid of the bad hammer. Now, how about you take the good one? And I was like, so you're a narcissist like the rest of them? Like, that's a weird comment to make. Yeah. Anyway, the only other things I have to note are Armie Hammer moved out of he and his wife Elizabeth's house in the dead of night. Okay. Outside, there was a trash can. In the trash can was left a mannequin that was tied up in rope. Neighbors say they didn't see himself on the premises, but said that trucks and a gaggle of movers descended on the property, working well after midnight, lit only by flashlights. In September, the house sold at a loss. In September, they listed it, and then it didn't sell until February at a loss. The other thing that should be noted is that, one of the other things that was said in a lot of the texts that people have come forward through is we're always referring to these women as kittens. Another thing he was always talking about was the need he had to drink their blood. And regardless of whether or not this was just a kink of his, whether he's completely innocent and just, is who he is, into kinky sex, who's, unfortunately, it's become very public and that's what's become now. Something very interesting to me is that at every turn in this case, from the beginning, Nate Parker, the deaths in 29 Palms, the sexually violent predators, all of these things are crimes that have been done against women. And it's, even if you go back in the Hammer family history, the abortion that killed that woman, the mistresses that were mistreated, all of these different things. It just is interesting to me that this person who has been put into the spotlight in this way because he has apparently abused these women has been connected now to so many other things, either directly or indirectly, that have involved the pain and the abuse of women. And for that reason, I felt that he was a relevant case to bring up on True Crime and Cocktails, Famous Fatalities Edition.
I have a lot of things to say.
I'd like to hear all of them.
One, we're going to, you know what? I'm going to take one and move it to the end. For one thing, you had commented to me, as you mentioned in this, that you originally wanted to make comparisons to Armie Hammer and Ted Bundy. And then you mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer, and I'm like, yeah, because Dahmer ate people, right? Again, because of the two of us, serial killers. And I'm just like, I know the names of the Care Bears. Yes. That's where I'm at mentally. So yeah, I find that wildly fascinating that Dahmer came up, and I was like, oh yeah. And he did talk about physically, actually literally eating people. To Blanche really appreciates you mentioning Zac Efron.
You're welcome.
Because
you're welcome.
That's one of Blanche's favorites. Also, while you were talking, did a quick Google image search because I was just curious. Because I know so little about Armie Hammer. So I didn't know what his wife looked like. So I did a look, and I feel that Elizabeth Chambers bears a very striking resemblance to Erica Lloyd.
Yes.
Not to mention, also, could it be something about he was obviously very angry at his wife because of that comment that I think it was an Instagram post you said where it was like, and my soon to be can't be soon enough or whatever ex-wife. And the fact that Erica Lloyd was a mother, is there some kind of anger there as well? I still want to know who found that cell phone on Cottonwood. I have a lot of questions about that. I have a lot of questions about this Ramsey fellow. But I also just so yes, Elizabeth and Erica look very similar. The idea of she's a mother, could that have been, is this his I'm going to take out my anger on my ex-wife on this woman who has similar features and is also a mother? I don't know. The idea of his lawyers being oh, he just wants to focus on his children. I don't buy that for a second when he needs to be drug tested to see his children and his reaction is, hey, guess what? I found drugs that don't count. Yep. I don't think that was a thing. Sorry.
Also, just remember, he did test positive for THC and benzos. So that's also two other drugs that he did have in his system. And then he was, grandstanding that he had this third other drug he could do that they weren't testing for. So to your point, yeah, continue.
Yeah, he's not if you're focused on seeing your kids, you're focused on seeing your kids. You're not I'm going to find how I can get super messed up with, but then still see my kids. And it's yeah, because if you end up testing positive for something and you can't see your kids, it's going to get out there. And that is going to then just destroy the career that is crumbling beneath you. And I could not be happier about that.
Yeah.
I'm also going to say, I don't know if this is early. I don't even know if I have blood in my veins anymore. It might just be vodka. But I just want to say, Lauren Ash, your research skills are unmatched. And I can say that. Hearing you say the phrase, I'll look into making some maps. That was my moment of so this is what it feels like for a bird to watch that baby bird fly out of the nest.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Thank you for your research.
It's a pleasure.
Not possibly be prouder. Again, just hearing you talk maps, hearing you talk family trees, I'm just so proud.
Bless it. I also just want to add very quickly.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned Dahmer, and now I'm my serial killer excitement has arisen.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey Dahmer, I remember because I've watched too much. He talked about how he did not actually like the act of killing. That was not interesting to him. For him, he just wanted to completely, quote, control somebody. Okay. So he always thought of killing as the unfortunate means to an end, right? Because if you kill somebody, then technically you can control them because they're dead and et cetera. And he would eat their bodies, et cetera. So I think for me, with seeing some of the things that, Armie Hammer had said and stuff like that, specifically, it did kind of ring a bell for me because it was the idea of the cannibalistic things. And listen, and I didn't get into, because again, we only have so much time. And there's people who have said, there's experts who have said that there are cannibalistic, fantasies that never are acted on legitimately. And this is a thing where someone's the eater, someone's the feeder, and this is the whole thing. But it was just for me, the idea that he would talk about wanting to kind of own someone completely. And the idea that it extended to these women talked about how he was controlling, how it's you can only see certain people at certain times. those kinds of things. Like he wanted to be so controlling. And then he also had this, it did make me think of Jeffrey Dahmer. That's not making me say that means it's proof that Armie Hammer has killed people. I'm not saying that. And listen, some of these people who have gone missing, again, the timelines don't add up. The Erica Lloyd timeline seems to add up. But again, that it could have been that person. But again, more than anything, my whole point is that this friend of his who owns these properties has a connection to 3 of these people who have passed and whose remains have been found. And the fact that body number 2 was found very, very close to Erica Lloyd's body. And the fact that James Escalante went missing from a place that was very, very close from where Erica Lloyd went missing. To me, it's just like, I just can't believe that they're not, unless it's one of those things where they're pretending they're not kind of exploring it and they actually are. I don't know. But to me, it's just like, I think, again, there's enough stuff there. And then the cell phone being found on a very tiny street that's so close to that motel. It just feels like something that needs to be looked into. That's all I'm saying.
I agree. And I think you could be onto something with the, sometimes they're like, oh, we're not looking into that, in the hopes that whoever they're actually looking into will continue doing what they're doing, have a false sense of security, and then do something and fuck up so that they can be like, aha, we were watching you this whole time. So who knows? But it could also be just straight up that they're like, oh yeah, people walk off into the desert to die all the time. Like middle-aged women often walk into lakes to kill themselves.
Thank you very much.
Reference to Lady in the Lake episode 9. Does that sound right? I feel possibly. Like the True Crew is screaming at me right now.
They're yelling. They're yelling out loud.
Yeah. I guess what we're saying is we just need to always do these lives so they can fact check us as we go about our own podcast. Yeah, they all just run together. God, there is just so much I want to say, but of course, time constraints.
Yes.
I feel justified in the fact that I have always found him just a little bit off. And there's just something about him that my gut is like, I don't like this. And because my gut is telling me something's not right. And I am very proud of it at that, that I feel like it picked up on something. I mean, my gut's also telling me like, ooh, chicken fingers.
That sounds nice.
A really buttery popcorn. We'll see. Who knows what the evening has in store? The point I'm making is back to a comment you had made on a previous episode. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And I mean, I feel for his children in this. I don't want them to have to pay in any way, but I am more than okay with his Hollywood pedestal crumbling beneath him.
Yes.
I'm more than happy about that. We don't like a once rich white man, suddenly not being able to do just whatever and control whoever he wants by throwing money around. That'd be great. And that's where I stand on that.
I agree.
Unfortunately, I feel like we do have to wrap things up.
Yep.
Do you want to tell the people the next episode?
I do. I'm so excited to announce that our next episode is our second patrons poll pick. And that, of course, is the Delphi murders.
She's right there. Stay tuned for that. If you would like a say in our next Patreon poll, go to patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails. We've got the monthly polls. We do monthly lives, which this month I think we went all out on this month. We do bonus episodes. So if you're looking for extra content of ours, that's where you go. Since you're going to be online anyway, head on over to Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube and give us a follow at True Crime and Cocktails. On Twitter, we are at Not Detectives. And remember, as always, if you would like more information, go to our website. We have virtual case files on this case and every case we have done before at truecrimeandcocktails.com. Lauren, love of my life, would you like to say goodnight to the people?
Good night, everybody.
Good night.